It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
Running sports call-in show. So happy to have you with us on this Saturday night, December the 26th. This is the last Saturday night / Sunday morning one-on-one in the year 2020. Alongside my partner, Nick DeLuca, I'm Jimmy Sullivan. Andrew Posadas will be along the way throughout the next 3 hours with the headlines and more. Nick, happy holidays to you. It's great to be with you tonight.
Happy holidays to you as well. I hope you had a Merry Christmas and everybody in the family is good and you were able to make the best of what was a weird holiday. I know that we did on our end, so it was certainly good to be able to do that. And also happy to hear that this is the last Saturday and Sunday into Sunday of 2020 because we need to turn the page. We need a new chapter, and we're getting it here in short order.
Yeah, I was thinking about that last night, and I think there's a large subset of people, including you and me, who are saying, thank God. Well, we are all done with this year, but that is neither here nor there. We do have a lot to get into over the next 3 hours. It's a busy time in sports right now. We've got football, we've got basketball, we've got some hot stove discussion as well. And Nick, a lot going on in the NFL front. Congratulations to your Buffalo Bills, 2020 AFC East champions, getting that done for the first time in 25 years. Maybe the big story, though, for at least our audience is maybe the worst victory in the franchise history of the New York Jets, and just how much that hurts in their pursuit of not only the number one pick, but Trevor Lawrence. Certainly, I think, Nick, a painful time for a lot of Jets fans.
Well, I will say that it is sort of embarrassing to go 0-16 and you want to win that one game. You know, I know the difference between 1-15 isn't necessary and 2-14 isn't a big. I'm just kidding. No, the Jets fans are just they're terrible. They're done. It's really a difficult situation. I know it's you know that the players are going out and they're trying to win and you feel good for them in some way because no one wants them to go out and say, all right, you guys got to go out there and get beat by 37 and continually get the brakes beat off of you every time you go out there. So you do feel good for the players. I will say I feel good for Frank Gore. I think is a dude who I know is sort of much maligned, and it's mind-boggling the number of touches that he gets in Adam Gase's offense right now. But at the same time, he's an NFL legend. He's going to be a Hall of Famer and a guy who has been at it longer than anyone has ever seen at the running back position. So happy for him to not at least go out on an 0-16 team. I think this is going to be it for him. But at the same time, you just blew it. You blew it, and there's no other way to say it. Trevor Lawrence was in the grasp, and that was the guy that was going to come in and change the scope of your franchise. And the Jets have been really so bad for so long and just continually spinning the wheel of trying to find the quarterback. I don't know, and you may be able to answer this question better than I, Jimmy, but when was the last time they felt like they had their guy? Have the Jets ever really had their guy? So to have somebody who is as slam dunk as Trevor Lawrence walking through the door, that was something you were willing to put up with 0-16 for. And we're saying, no, we don't want to win another game. So interested now to see how they approach this whole thing, because is it Justin Fields? Is it we're going to try and bring in a new head coach and develop Sam Darnold? Are we going to trade out of the number 2 pick? Are we going to use it on a weapon for Darnold, on protection, whatever the case may be. And there are a lot of holes that need to be plugged for the Jets everywhere. So it just has opened up so much possibility and so much intrigue with the pick that certainly wasn't there. But the Jets and their fan base, they don't want intrigue. They want Trevor Lawrence, and they're on track to not get him now. You never know. I don't want to open the door, don't want to crack it and say there's hope. I don't see Jacksonville winning either of its last two games. So I think it's going to be decision time for the Jets. So we lost Jimmy here for a second here, and that's too bad because I figured he was going to come in and say something about the Jets and how good things were going to be. But it's really.
Can you hear me now? Am I back now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Zoom. Zoom stinks.
I thought you were going to come in and say something positive about the Jets, and that's why Zoom automatically muted you. That's what my thought process was.
Yeah, that's embarrassing. I will say the Jaguars currently hold the number 1 pick, and the fate of the world lies in Mitchell Trubisky's shoulders. He plays the Jaguars tomorrow. As we move along here into the midnight hour, we'll get into some basketball. There were 5 games yesterday in the NBA, none of which particularly close. Brooklyn Nets looking very, very good in the first 2 games of the season. People being very rational about their takes on that front. And then we'll get into college football. And Nick, you and I, big college football fans, we do the podcast every week. And it's that time of the year, college football playoff on Friday. Notre Dame, Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson. A lot of debate, discussion, maybe even some controversy about the top 4. And what will be an interesting playoff, even if not necessarily for the games themselves. As crazy as that sounds, there's a lot of intriguing storylines going around, but I think 2 very clear favorites, Nick, in Alabama and Clemson in these 2 games.
For sure. The College Football Gridiron podcast, of course, available on WFUVsports.org, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. But it's really a fascinating playoff to try and figure out exactly how all this is going to go down. Alabama, Clemson, the favorites. Bama's offense has been absolutely unstoppable this year. That's as good as it gets in the country. I don't know that there's even a number 2 that's terribly close. Although if there is a number 2 that's terribly close, it's the number 2 team in the country in the Clemson Tigers, who can certainly run it up on offense as well. And then you get into Ohio State, and what are they? What have we seen from them? Number 3 in the country. They only play 6 games. In the games that they've played against good competition, it's been a struggle. Indiana was a 1-possession game. Northwestern, they trailed for a long time in the Big Ten championship game. So what are we getting from Ohio State? And circling back to some of our Jets talk, what is Ohio State getting from Justin Fields? Something that I know a number of Jets fans will want to pay attention to here in the college football playoff. And is this a guy that you can take towards the top of the draft and everything there as well? So, and then you get into number 4 in Notre Dame, and a really, really disappointing loss in the ACC championship game. Not, again, that they weren't going to get in, but when you go in and are playing Clemson, a team that you've beaten, and now they are fully healthy or healthier, and Trevor Lawrence comes back, that game was over before it started. And Notre Dame was just not, I don't know if they weren't ready to play or Clemson's just that much better. That's sort of a familiar theme that we've seen the last couple of years as well. And it's going to be a significant uphill battle for Notre Dame to try and be competitive against Alabama. I don't give them much of a shot, and I'm sure we'll get into this later in the show, but it's just a difficult sort of place to be from a program perspective in Notre Dame, because they are continually trying to figure out how to get into the upper echelon of college football, and they just haven't been able to get there the last couple of years.
Alabama with 3 players on the offensive side of the ball in the top 5 in Heisman voting. I'd say that's pretty good. Close out the midnight hour with an interview as part of our Off the Air podcast with Jake Kring-Schreifels. He's held a number of different roles over the past few years. Class of 2014 at WFUV. He has worked for the New York Yankees, the Washington football team, among others. And we'll get into some baseball as we hit the 1 a.m. hour, kind of a slow developing hot stove market. There were some bots on Twitter yesterday saying George Springer was going to finalize a deal with the Mets. You'll be shocked to know that has not happened yet. But a lot to get into with baseball. And then we're going to close out our show with a couple of segments I'm really excited for. So we're going to have a headline segment with Andrew Posadas, a year in review. Now, I don't know about you, Nick. I don't know what's coming in this segment. I haven't been told. But I'm sure there are some stories that I forgot about. I'm sure you're probably in the same boat with how long a year this has felt like. And in a kind of sick way, I'm looking forward to reliving what we've been through this year, if only for the purposes of this particular segment.
If it gives us a good laugh or remembering something, I'm all for it. The way this year has gone, I don't know how much laughing we'll be doing, but yeah, I'm certainly excited for it too.
Laughing, crying, whatever it may be, we'll do it all over the next 3 hours for you, taking you up until 2 a.m. on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. Thanks for being with us here tonight. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
To follow WFUV Sports on all of our social media platforms. At WFUV Sports on Twitter, at WFUV_sports on Instagram, and WFUV Sports on Facebook and YouTube. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Show here on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. If you've got any comments, anything to say at all, leave it in the comment section on our video on Facebook or YouTube. We appreciate everyone tuning in on this Saturday night as we go through some of the biggest stories in sports right now. And in New York, one of the biggest stories is that the New York Jets might not be getting Trevor Lawrence. Right now, they sit at 1-13 after last week's win over the LA Rams. The Jets, according to ESPN's FPI, have about a 1-4 chance of getting back to number one. The Jets have the Browns and the Patriots to close out their season. Jaguars have the Bears and the Colts. Nick, I'm sad. I can't lie to you. I was holding out for Trevor Lawrence. I also do think that it's a little bit disconcerting that as a fan base, and we talked about this with you and the Buffalo Bills, you guys are going back to the playoffs and you win the AFC East, but as a Jets fan base, you're sitting here and there's no hope except for this shiny thing, basically, in the form of Trevor Lawrence, who's a great player, don't get me wrong. But this is what we have come to, that the Jets have been a revolving door at the quarterback position for God knows how many years. And we're all sitting here saying there's one hope, one way forward for this franchise, and it's to go 0-16. That is what we have come to. And to me, not only do you lose Trevor Lawrence, which is a tragedy, but maybe the most tragic part of all of this is that everyone, including myself, was pulling so hard for this to happen, and it falls through the cracks on a Frank Gore check down with 2 minutes to go in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's unfortunate in the position that it puts the fans in, but I don't blame any Jets fan for wanting to continue to lose and go 0-16, because what's the point? Do you feel better about your team now that you're going to go 1-15 as opposed to 0-16? Does it matter? This is the same team regardless. If you go 2-14, you win another game, are you going to feel good? This team is still not in a position to be remotely competitive. They've got an issue, I think, at ownership first and foremost, but at head coach right now that they're going to get rid of. They need a quarterback. They need offensive line help. They need wide receiver help. They need defensive line help at edge rusher. They need linebacker help. They need secondary help pretty significantly. So if I missed any part of the team, let me know, but they need help everywhere.
They need a kicker too.
Yeah, okay. So I missed the kicker part. Yeah. So there's not a lot to work with, and there's nothing there. So it's frustrating, and you wouldn't feel any differently about it. So I don't blame Jets fans for a second, because what's the point? If you're from the Jets organization perspective, if you want your fans to root for you, put a better product on the field. Be competitive. But when you're not, this is what happens. So I don't blame the fans at all. That said, to me, there are two aspects to this that make it extremely disappointing. One, of course, is that they won't end up with Trevor Lawrence, who can be a generational talent and is someone who, in a lot of respects, and where the Jets have gone wrong a lot of times, be a dysfunctional organization, not get everything right, but this dude is good enough where he can overcome it, right? I always said, and I have said this about Darnold at times too, it's really difficult, not to say that Sam Darnold is not talented, because he is, but there is not something about him that is extraordinarily spectacular to where if he is not groomed the right way, he can overcome it. You know what I mean? He's not a guy with Josh Allen's arm or Lamar Jackson's athleticism. Even Lamar Jackson might have struggled with the Jets. Certainly Allen, with the way he's been developed, would have too. But building the system around him, it's just so often that it's as you get into the weeds of it, the fit and the organization that goes into this is really what helps develop and make this quarterback. But the real tragedy to me is that who wants to coach this team now, right? So at least you could go in and say, well, we're going to get Trevor Lawrence, and a coach might really believe in him and think, okay, well, I've got the piece where the most important piece needs to be in a franchise quarterback. So I'll figure the rest of it out, despite some of the headaches that are going to come with being the Jets head coach. Now, you want to come in and work with Sam Darnold? You want to come in and try and develop Justin Fields under these conditions? That, to me, is the biggest thing. I don't know who wants to coach them.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. And it also depends a little bit on the commitment level from the front office in terms of how they want to improve this offense. Because, the offense obviously has not been good, and Sam Darnold has not been very good this season. But there's some talent here, right? Like Mekhi Becton looks like a stud on the left side of that offensive line. You've got some decent young weapons. Denzel Mims looks like he could be, really solid. They just haven't done a good enough job getting him the ball. You have to figure out how much of it's coaching, and I think a lot of it's coaching, to be honest, because you're not putting Sam Darnold in positions to succeed. Now, grant that it can't all be on coaching, because there are certain things Sam Darnold does during games where you're saying, oh my goodness, what went through your mind when you were making that decision? But on the other hand, you also have to decide, and this will be part of the new coach's job, whoever it is, because I think both of us don't think Adam Gase is going to be back. Assuming they stay at number 2, which is probably the likeliest scenario right now, do you go with a Justin Fields or Zach Wilson? Or do you say, all right, we're going to give it one more crack with Sam Darnold, basically, and either draft Penei Sewell, who's the best lineman in this draft, probably the best non-quarterback in this draft at number 2 out of Oregon, or trade out of number 2, get a ton of assets. And remember, too, the Jets have a ton of cap room, so they could go out and get an Allen Robinson, for example, who's going to be a free agent, a really good wide receiver to try to help out Sam Darnold. I think that's an interesting call as well. But you do raise an interesting point about who's going to coach this team, because a lot of it was the allure of, hey, you're going to get the number 1 pick, who is, the probably the closest thing to a sure thing in the NFL draft in a while. And all of a sudden that's not there. So I think the team has to make a commitment like, hey, we're going to spend money, we're going to make this team better. And whether that's with Sam Darnold or Justin Fields or Zach Wilson, I don't know. And I think that's an interesting decision that this front office and, for frankly ownership, if we know the Jets organizational structure, is going to have to make.
I'm not here to defend Adam Gase and what has been just a mind-bogglingly bad tenure as the head coach of the Jets. But at some point, Sam Darnold's got to play a little bit better too, right? And I'm not advocating or saying that there are only a couple Aaron Rodgers type talents, right? So whoever you decide are in the NFL right now who are the elite of the elite quarterbacks, then maybe that'll change things. The point is that Aaron Rodgers was still able to win how many games under Mike McCarthy, and look what he looks like in Dallas right now. So at some point, great quarterbacks are able to overcome the coaching. And I know that it's as difficult a position as there is to be put in, and that the situation matters a lot. At the same time, if this is your guy who's been your starter all year, even with the stripped down roster, the fact that you were talking about going 0-16 tells me that maybe it's time to move on if I'm the Jets. So I would be looking elsewhere in terms of the quarterback position right now. I just don't know that it can work out with Sam Darnold in New York. I'm not saying he's finished. I'm not saying he can't be successful elsewhere. To me, it would be time to move on. That would be what I would advocate for. And then you're sort of looking at everything else. Now, at the same time, if you feel like, okay, we don't like the available quarterback options right now, you can always keep Darnold as your bridge guy. He is another guy who is not the permanent solution, but the placeholder right now. You'll build up the roster and then make other arrangements at another point, whether it be the next draft, 2 drafts from now, free agency, however you feel like you need to solve that quarterback situation. But they just are in a difficult spot right now because there's a lot of in between. If you're rebuilding, I don't know that you want to spend a ton of money on Allen Robinson or Juju Smith-Schuster in free agency at the wide receiver position, or you want to make sure that if you're coming off a 1-15 season, that you are in the appropriate sort of cap space here and not spending like a team that is a playoff team or right up against the cap, because that doesn't serve you well either. So the Jets need to make some careful decisions. It'll start with the head coach, as I mentioned, and seeing who it's going to be. But it's a tough situation there because, again, if you're Eric Bieniemy, do you want to take this job right now with the options you're going to have? Brian Daboll, you want to take this job with the options you're going to have? So it's certainly an interesting balance. But if you're asking me to sort of make the decision on Darnold, and again, you never know which head coach comes in, I'll say it this way. I would not be hiring an offensive coach to come in and fix Sam Darnold. That would be my message as the Jets organization right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up too, because if I was, one of these guys that you just mentioned, I'd rather go to Houston with Deshaun Watson or Detroit with, Matt Stafford and some weapons, or the Chargers, which I think everyone thinks is going to be open, than I would with the Jets. And that's going to be the problem they encounter. And also, let's remember, too, the last time they did a coaching search, it sounded like they were kind of close on bringing in Matt Rule. And then they said to him that he couldn't bring in his assistants, basically, that they were going to hire his assistant coaches for him, which is another thing. I'll disagree with you in the sense that, you're saying move on from Sam Darnold, and look, that's a valid take. And the Jets could lose and the Jaguars could win this week, and we could be having a very different conversation. But I also think you have to look at it as you're at number 2. Is Zach Wilson or Justin Fields, whoever's the number 2 quarterback on the board, like, do you feel better about him than you would about Sam Darnold? Because, look, Sam Darnold needs to play better, and I agree with you on that. But he does show you at times that he can be really good. And, people have talked about, for example, when the Jets did have the number 1 pick and we thought they were going to get Lawrence, trading Darnold to a place like Pittsburgh. And everybody along those lines was kind of saying, look, if he goes to a better environment, he's probably going to play well. And the Jets need to create the better environment. The problem is, as has always been the case with the New York Jets, under the ownership of the Johnson family, are they capable of being that better environment? Are they going to build a functional organizational structure? I like what Joe Douglas has done in a year and change as the general manager, but is it possible that the Jets can cultivate this environment? And you were asking, Nick, when was the last time the Jets really felt like they had their guy at quarterback? And at least through the draft, I mean, Mark Sanchez, maybe, he was a first round pick. They traded up for him, but he didn't pan out. They gave him all the help in the world. Yeah, Chad Pennington, I mean, he had his share of success in the early 2000s, but those were good teams largely because of their defense and running the ball with Curtis Martin. So, I mean, this is a team that has practically been a turnstile at quarterback, it feels like, since Joe Namath. And that's why we were all latching on to Trevor Lawrence. And now I think the better option here, if you're sitting at 2, is to say, all right, let's give it, I would give it one more year with Darnold. Give him a good offensive coordinator. That's another thing, too. He cycled through a couple different offenses. And say, look, if you're not going to get it done now, it's just not going to happen. And I think that would be a better route to go with than, taking a Justin Fields. I mean, Justin Fields looks incredibly concerning right now. Zach Wilson, I mean, there's questions about who he's played. And when he went up against a bona fide pass rush in Coastal Carolina, it didn't go well. So there's question marks with these 2 guys. It's definitely not a home run, and that's why getting the number 1 pick, I think, was so important, and now that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I don't disagree with necessarily hanging on to Darnold for this year. My whole thing is that at some point, he's not the guy who's going to lead you to where you want to go, whether that be the Super Bowl playoffs, whatever it is. That's the only thing that I would argue. If you feel like you don't like one of the guys who are coming out in the draft this year below Trevor Lawrence, if you're not a fan of Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, certainly, but by all means, don't take those guys. Don't just draft a quarterback for the sake of drafting a quarterback. All I would say is if you feel better about building things up at other positions, whether that be Penei Sewell or an outside weapon, trading down and accumulating a bunch of picks, that's fine. And if you want Darnold to stay and maybe give him another shot, I don't necessarily think that's the worst thing in the world. I just am at a point with Sam Darnold and the Jets organization where I don't think that those 2 can be successful with one another.
I think I'll make one more point and then we'll move on because we got to go to headlines with Andrew Posadas next. It is, I think, also worth seeing what Sam Darnold can do outside of Adam Gase, because I'll give you 2 words: Ryan Tannehill. And look at how he's playing now in Tennessee without Adam Gase. And he's played well. And granted, it's a different system, and his role is not necessarily to put up gaudy numbers every week. And he also has probably the best running back in football in Derrick Henry. But there is something to be said for seeing what Sam Darnold's capable of without dealing with the whatever you want to call it that is Adam Gase as a head coach, as a play caller, and as a brilliant offensive mind, as Christopher Johnson would say. That'll wrap it up for our NFL talk. It's always fun talking about the Jets. I just love it. I think it's great. Got some headlines next. NFL, NBA. We're just getting started here on One-on-One. I'm not tired yet. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Half of our first hour here on One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Welcome back, everyone. I am Andrew Posadas, of course, alongside Jimmy Sullivan and Nick DeLuca. Guys, let's get into some headlines, shall we? And let's start in the NFL. Just one game on the docket as the Minnesota Vikings went to New Orleans to visit the Saints. And we know Santa Claus has a list of who's been naughty or nice. And guys, I think Saints running back Alvin Kamara is right at the top of the nice list because he tied an NFL record 6 touchdowns on Christmas Day, tied for the most in NFL history with fullback Ernie Nevers, who did it with the Chicago Cardinals back in 1929. Kamara is only the 4th player to score 6 touchdowns of any kind in a game, joining the aforementioned Nevers, one of my favorite players of all time, Dub Jones, back in 1951, and of course, Gale Sayers back in 1965. More importantly, the Saints clinch their 4th straight NFC South title, and for Alvin Kamara, he set a franchise record with 21 touchdowns on the season. Jimmy, I'll start with you. What did you think about Alvin Kamara's history-tying performance on Christmas Day?
First of all, let me just say that a couple years ago, I was actually on a flight with Alvin Kamara. I didn't find out until later. But I have now officially flown with a man and shared airspace with somebody who scored 6 TDs in an NFL game. So I'm very happy to be able to say that. In all seriousness, though, I caught the tail end of that game. I'll be honest, I was watching basketball yesterday, and I think it's really interesting to think about the New Orleans Saints and in the context of where this offense is right now with Drew Brees, frankly, not playing very well. I mean, he threw a couple picks yesterday. And, if I'm an opposing defense going up against the Saints in the playoffs, I think right now they would play the Cardinals, pending the results of the rest of the games this week. I'm sitting there and saying, we're going all out to stop Alvin Kamara. Drew Brees is going to have to beat me, which would have sounded crazy to say, 5, 6, 7 years ago. But with where Brees is at right now, I think that's the way you would have to go. And then let's just keep in mind, the Saints scored 52 points yesterday. Drew Brees didn't throw a touchdown. So I think, Alvin Kamara is going to get a ton of touches when they get to the playoffs. And if I'm a defense, I'm ready for that. And I'm saying, look, we're going to throw 7, 8 in the box to stop this guy, whether it be in the running game, in the short passing game. And Drew Brees is going to have to do something against me if the Saints are going to be productive offensively. So congratulations to Alvin Kamara. And I think it bodes some really interesting questions for how the Saints are best suited to not only get to the playoffs, which they have now done, but also make a deep run and potentially go to the Super Bowl.
I'd just like to point out that I was a huge Chicago Cardinals fan back in the 1920s. So that was my biggest take. I was like, oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that Alvin Kamara was able to tie the record. No, it's interesting that you brought up the second half of your point, Jimmy, in that the way that the Saints are operating right now, because that to me is the biggest thing. In addition to, by the way, I mean, I never want to go to the negative initially, but Minnesota, that was incredibly bad, right? And there were times where Alvin Kamara was just untouched, right? There wasn't much of an effort to do much of anything on the defensive end in stopping the run. The pass defense wasn't horrendous, and that's also the other part of this where we get into our talk about Drew Brees. But that was one of the things to me that you just can't ignore. But certainly really impressive, and impressive on the front of Alvin Kamara and also New Orleans' offensive line, because they really, really controlled the line of scrimmage and won them that game, because there was nothing that Minnesota was going to do. Because at the end of the day, you can call whatever blitz you want, you can call whatever coverage you want, but New Orleans was going to control the line of scrimmage, and between the white lines, they were going to get that thing done. So a credit to them. And Alvin Kamara, it's certainly not something that's easy to do, not something that happens all the time. And for him to have the vision to score the touchdowns and make the right read and find the right hole is also important. So not to be ignored on that front either. But when you get into the Saints, and I think that's where it really gets interesting, they remind me a lot of, as odd as this is to say, the Indianapolis Colts right now, as the two guys that were sort of switched in San Diego way back in the day with Drew Brees and Phillip Rivers. But this is a team that you feel pretty good about their defense for the most part, although in today's NFL, you're always going to have games where you're not pitching a shutout. That's the way it works. So you feel good about their defense on the whole, and for the most part, running game has been really good. You've got a very solid offensive line, but the question is, how far can your aging quarterback take you? And that's the whole thing. Drew Brees has really not looked the same this season, but in particular in coming off the injury. Like, there's another step to sort of the regression, or that ball really doesn't look like it's coming out of his hand the right way, or the way that we're accustomed to seeing it, a lot of the way that we've seen from Phillip Rivers this year too. So it's just interesting, because as you get into the playoffs, Jimmy, I think you nailed it, right? Teams are going to start stacking the box, and it's going to be about, can Drew Brees beat us? And that's a weird conversation to be having here based upon what we've seen from Drew Brees throughout his career and being a dude who leads the NFL in career passing yards. But I think that's where we are right now. And hopefully for him, they can protect him as well as they did yesterday. And he can also continue to improve on the health front. But it's interesting. I'm almost to the point where I'm saying I'm picking Green Bay to come out of the NFC, because I just don't know that there's enough there on offense if a team can stop the run against New Orleans for them to win. And maybe they can't. Maybe that's what 6 touchdowns told us yesterday, that there is no team in the NFC that can stop the Saints rushing attack, which might be the case. But they're just, they lack that explosiveness in the passing game. In today's NFL, that's really tough to overcome.
Yeah, Nick, I think Jimmy and you have really just hit the nail on the head with that point about Drew Brees. He's not the same guy. And even before he had broken his ribs, a lot of people were saying, has Father Time finally caught up to him? And I think you make a great comparison with the Colts and Phillip Rivers, and the fact that now these two teams are operating as run-first teams. And I think that's what they're going to have to do if they want to get the most out of their team come playoff time. But again, I think if teams are not sold on Drew Brees' health, as you mentioned, Nick, they're going to stack the box. They're going to play the run. They're going to stop Alvin Kamara and hope that their secondary can hold up against a Drew Brees that obviously isn't going to be 100% healthy anytime soon, or not until the offseason. So I think for the Saints, while it's a great thing in Alvin Kamara, you give him this huge extension and you're hoping that these are the type of performances that he can give for you. While you're happy on that front, I think if you're Sean Payton, you have to be thinking to yourself, how far can Drew Brees actually take us? If his ribs aren't 100% and they're not going to get any better anytime soon, am I doing a disservice by leaving him in and potentially risking further injury? Does he think about maybe Taysom Hill? I mean, obviously Taysom Hill didn't do much, but I think he did enough as far as being a game manager is concerned to get them a few wins while Drew Brees was gone. But again, you mentioned the Packers. We look at teams like the Rams who have a fierce defense. What are they going to do? I'm sure they're licking their chops, hoping that they can get the Saints in the playoffs, because I think a lot of teams think they match up well with Drew Brees being compromised. But Jimmy, again, I think in the hierarchy, I think it is the Green Bay Packers first, and then the New Orleans Saints. Teams like the Rams, the Seahawks, they're out there, fighting for position. But at this moment, if I'm a betting man, I'm probably putting my money on Aaron Rodgers before I put my money on Drew Brees right now.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think back to the Broncos in 2015 when Peyton Manning was in his last year and he just wasn't very good, and how they were winning in the playoffs that year. And it was their defense was amazing. Von Miller is Super Bowl MVP. And I think about how the Saints are going to have to win. And it's, we talked about the running game, but it's their defense also. And they lost Quan Alexander yesterday to a torn Achilles, which is a huge loss. But, their defense has been playing, for the most part, pretty well. I mean, they gave up a lot of yards yesterday, and they gave up a lot to Patrick Mahomes, as pretty much everyone in the league does. But, their defense is going to have to play at a really high level, and probably against, Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, or depending on how the matchups and the wins and losses shake out, maybe even Tom Brady in the playoffs, depending on how that goes. So I think it's, on the offensive end, I think it's incredibly concerning, but they have to win games a certain way now. It used to just be that they could get into shootouts and run you out of the building. And that's just not the Saints anymore. And that's just going to have to be the way it is. Honk if you agree with me.
I agree with you there too, and this was it. This was an exceptional case where you just get into trying to figure out. That's all the Saints fans who are telling us, stop talking.
I'm saying like a Mardi Gras float.
I didn't get to mention, right, like they didn't have Michael Thomas, which is also an important piece of this whole equation and puzzle. And how does that affect everything is also important, because they haven't really, not that they need to necessarily get on the same page, but they haven't really played a lot with each other this year in the context of this whole offense, and then how Drew Brees looks this year. So that'll also change things a little bit. But I'm with you, because it's certainly interesting. It's certainly different. I don't know that I'm buying into, especially with one of, as you look at a potential even Super Bowl matchup, Kansas City is certainly right there in the AFC. Dare I say the Buffalo Bills there as well. But this does not seem like a defense, especially with those offenses. This is not the year where your defense is carrying you to a championship, right? Like Kansas City just doesn't, they don't not score. You can't shut them down in that way. Even Tennessee, I don't know that they have enough defensively as you look up and down the AFC playoff picture, which again is even if New Orleans is able to get to the Super Bowl, you feel like they've had a good year, and then it's all bets are off with one game. But I'm just interested to see how the rest of this shakes out, because you've got a defense that I think is good at times, but I don't know that it's that level of Denver Broncos 2015. And I also feel like they have better weapons than what Denver had on the outside. Michael Thomas is not someone who you ignore, and I think that New Orleans is able to do some things with Taysom Hill, and I like what they have piece-wise offensively. Alvin Kamara is much better than any running back Denver had that year. That said, it's all on Drew Brees, and I'm interested to see how that continues, and if he's really somebody who just needs to get healthy, or if this is sort of what we are going to expect for the rest of the season. Because if it is, I don't give the Saints much of a shot to get to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, the Saints currently at 11-4. I'm sure they'll be rooting for the Tennessee Titans to beat the Green Bay Packers so they can be both tied for first in the NFC. Fellas, let's move from the gridiron to the hardwood, and let's go to the collegiate level, because we had our first Power 5 team to drop out and opt out of the rest of their season after starting the year. The Duke women's basketball team, they will end their season after 4 games. The team was 3-1. They announced on Friday that their season would be over. They had been on pause since December 16th because of 2 positive tests and contact tracing within the program's travel party. They canceled their last 3 games. Their next game was supposed to be next Thursday against the University of Louisville. And for Duke, this is interesting because new head coach Kara Lawson, who used to work with ESPN, had said earlier, I believe a month ago, that she didn't think that anybody should be playing right now. She didn't think it was the right idea. Obviously, there was big news from the men's basketball team and head coach, Coach K, saying that he thought that maybe teams shouldn't be playing right now. But as for what we know, the rest of the programs at Duke will continue playing. The men's basketball team will continue, and their spring sports will continue going into January and February. But as of right now, Duke's women's basketball team, the first Power 5 team to drop out after starting the season. Nick, what do you think about this decision from the Duke women's basketball team?
Quite frankly, I think it's easy for Duke to make and not something that's necessarily realistic for the rest of the country. Like I'm just trying to be as real as possible here, but that's not to ignore anything that any of the issues that go on with COVID. Certainly take that seriously and take the proper precautions. But this is just not something that, say, a team in the A10 or a team in the MAC or whatever conference you want to pick has the ability to do, right? With the way that colleges and universities are struggling for money right now, it's just not realistic for them to put these things on pause for now a second straight year in the way that maybe Duke, because of the just ridiculous revenue that they're able to bring in from basketball and even from football as a big time program in that sense, are able to afford to do. Now, I'm not advocating for anyone to go out there and say, all right, we got to play in a situation that we're uncomfortable with. And if that's the decision that Duke women's basketball made, then I support that in that sense. But I would also say that it's just not the opportunity that is afforded to a majority of the country where maybe they feel a little bit uncomfortable too. The reality is that it's just something that has to happen for colleges and universities to stay open in a lot of cases, or to continue to afford some of the other programs that exist at these colleges and universities. So it's an interesting sort of situation for Duke to make this decision. Support them if that's what they feel is best for them and that's what they want to do. It's just, to me, important to recognize that this is not an option that is on the table for most of the country.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. When you think about COVID and all the stuff that goes on, and you have a couple of positive tests in your system, it could be a scary thing. And we've seen Keontae Johnson, who is a player at Florida, who apparently had COVID over the summer and collapsed on the floor and had to be rushed to the hospital. And thankfully, it seems like he's going to make a recovery. And look, we don't know for sure if that's COVID related, but that possibility certainly exists with the stuff that we found out about this disease and what it does after you've actually had it. So it makes sense from that standpoint. And I just don't know that it's going to be indicative of like a lot of teams doing this, as you said, Nick, because we talked about Duke, and I read the statement yesterday, and it was obviously kind of a Friday afternoon news dump, throw in the holiday, and maybe it got a little lost in the shuffle, but I was reading the statement, and it sounded like it was the player's decision. And for that, I have to give Kara Lawson a lot of credit, because it really seems like the players had the autonomy to say, we're done. And that's, I think, really good to see in the NCAA, which has frankly exploited athletes for a while. So to see that the players really seem to take charge on this, I think was good. I don't know that this is going to become a trend, and I'm very skeptical that it is for a lot of the reasons that you outlined, Nick. The NCAA women's tournament is going to happen. The NCAA men's tournament is going to happen. They make a lot of money on that in various different ways. And, I really don't see like a lot of programs, if even anyone, doing that. And if I could, maybe just say one more thing. Obviously, this Duke decision is totally understandable, and you 100% get how they came to that solution. But for every Duke women's basketball, there are however many other teams that do want to play, and there's a reason hashtag We Want to Play took off in the summer. Now, as with football, it was a little different case, but it's the same idea. Like there are, I would say, like a lot of student athletes who really, really want to play this season. I think that's going to stay that way, and we have seen it stay that way because a lot of programs have dealt with COVID. The Florida men's basketball team has played 0 games a month into the season because of their COVID issues, of other teams' COVID issues, and they're still sitting there saying, "Hey, we're gonna tip off on the 30th or whatever day it is, and we're gonna go from there, and we're gonna play our season." So I think I totally understand it both ways. On the Duke side, where you say, "Look, we're done, we're not going to play," and with the decisions other teams have made, where they're saying, "Hey, no, we want to play out this season. Our players want to come back, our coaches want to come back, and we want to play." I think I look at it on both sides, and this isn't to hedge, but I think I really totally understand it going both ways.
Yeah, and in my opinion, I think this really does fall on the NCAA because they're allowing every program in the country to kind of police themselves and make these crucial decisions on whether they should continue playing. I mean, we saw Gonzaga, they had positive cases within their travel party, but yet they still went and played a couple of games. And then Jimmy mentioned Florida men's basketball team, which cancels the rest of their non-conference schedule in order because they didn't feel like they had enough time to get ready for that matchup with Central Connecticut State. I believe that was scheduled for the 17th or the 19th. But again, it's like Kara Lawson said earlier this month. She said, quote, "I don't think we should be playing right now. That's my opinion on it," end quote. And again, if the NCAA leaves it up to these programs, if you don't have coaches who are cognizant or who really feel like they shouldn't be playing, a lot of these coaches are going to play. Their players want to play. And I think given the risks, even so, players just at this point, not that they don't care, but they're just so desperate to get back on the court and play again that they're willing to go travel and go through the protocols and the risks in order to get a full season in. And it looks like by hell or high water, the NCAA will have a tournament. But again, the first Power 5 team to opt out, and maybe not the last. Obviously, the season's yet to be over yet. We're not even to 2021 yet. So maybe more to come in the next couple of months. But fellas, I want to get one more headline in, go from the collegiate ranks back up to the professional ranks. And guys, we have to update this James Harden Houston Rockets situation. We know that their season opener against the Oklahoma City was postponed because they didn't have the minimum required amount of players after James Harden was ruled out. Only 7 guys against the required 8 that you need to play an NBA game. The Rockets and the Blazers are playing tonight as we speak, and James Harden will be set to make his season debut. The Rockets will have 9 players with them in Portland. And again, 6 players out, including John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins, due to health and safety protocols. Jimmy, how much longer can the Houston Rockets keep James Harden in H-Town?
Hopefully for them, honestly, not too much longer, because every day he's a Houston Rocket, it seems like the value goes down on him, right? He comes back. We've seen the pictures. He looks out of shape. And he was out partying. Forgive me, I'm going to sound like I'm 90 years old here. Who was the rapper he was part? Was it
Lil Baby?
Lil Baby.
Lil
Okay,
Baby.
sorry, forgive me on that one. But like at some point, this is what bothers me about all this stuff. Between Harden going to the nightclub, celebrating one of his friends who was becoming a boss, which I guess makes it okay, and these Rockets players who apparently went to somebody's apartment and got haircuts. The thing that annoys me about it is, sports right now, business, life, whatever field you want to choose, everyone's sacrificing something, right? Like we're on Zoom, we can't see each other. Nick, I saw you in person for the first time in a while the other day. Andrew, I don't know if I've seen you in person since March. Like the whole thing is a huge sacrifice, this pandemic. It's what we're all dealing with right now. That's just the way it's going to have to be for a few more months. And yet here you have like James Harden went to a strip club. Like I didn't even know those were still open, which is crazy. But it just bothers me that we all have to sacrifice stuff, and NBA players are kind of at the front of that too. Like they're sacrificing time with their families. I mean, on a bunch of teams they were playing yesterday on Christmas, and we're going through all this to make sure we have a season. And yet here are the Rockets just disregarding all of that. So it kind of annoys me, to be honest. But this James Harden situation, I don't even know what to say anymore. I mean, we'll see how it goes tonight. But, he comes back. He's not in shape. It makes me question how serious he is about this basketball thing. Like, that sounds terrible, but by his actions, you have to ask that question.
I think he just wants out of Houston. I think that's pretty much the impetus for everything that he is doing right now, and I think that's where he is, and it's frustrating. I agree with you, Jimmy, 100%. Because there are a number of people in a bunch of walks of life that would love to have the opportunity to make the money that they're making, and it's not opportunity to make any money or the money that they feel like they can on a regular basis. Talk about a small business owner who gets his store, her store shut down or modified business, whatever that looks like in whatever state you're in. James Harden gets an opportunity to go in and play basketball, the rest of the Houston Rockets at the rate of what they were originally supposed to be contracted for. So you just got to follow the protocols and you're going to make a lot of money in addition to getting to do what you want to do every day. So certainly frustrating, but I think it's a product of him just wanting out more than anything else. There's not much left for James Harden in Houston. So I'm with you in saying that I think that they should move him in short order here, because every day that he's there, the value is going down.
Yeah, Nick, you make a great point there. I'm sure other teams, whether it's the Brooklyn Nets, the Miami Heat, the Denver Nuggets we've heard of, the Boston Celtics, I'm sure they are just giddy right now, seeing that James Harden continually is just showing his dismay and really his just dislike for the Houston Rockets. Now, he wants out. And again, when you decline an extension that would pay you $50 million a year, that's how you know someone wants out. And he put on Instagram, he deleted this off his Instagram story, but he had said something along the lines of every day it's something different. But James, every day it's something different because you are doing things that are implicating yourself and you're putting yourself in compromising situations. I don't care if it's the baby's birthday, little baby's birthday, Bow Wow's birthday. I don't care whose birthday it is. You cannot be there in a strip club in an indoor event. And Adam Silver really gave him leniency. He was on the jump. And he said that he didn't ultimately suspend James Harden because it was Christmas and it was James Harden's first offense. But guys, this feels like it's James Harden's 10th offense. I mean, he's been at parties doing whatever he wants. He didn't report to training camp. And God bless Steven Silas's heart. The guy spends 20 years as an assistant in this league and then comes into this situation. And as Nick mentioned, at this point, if I'm Danny Ainge or I'm Sean Marks, I'm going to call Tillman Fertitta. I'm going to call the Houston Rockets and say, if you want to unload James Harden, this is what we're giving up. We're not giving up any more. And if you don't want to deal him, then have fun for the next 2 or 3 years having to go through that circus. I mean, we'll talk more NBA a bit later, but Jimmy, it's James Harden really doing himself no favors with the public right now. And for the Houston Rockets, they're just caught between a rock and a hard place right now.
I will say the book that Steven Silas eventually writes about his basketball life is going to be fantastic. I'm just going to skip to this chapter because this is incredible stuff. Andrew, good stuff on those headlines. Andrew's coming back with us after this, going to be talking some Knicks and Nets on the other side of this break. One-on-one, taking you up until 2 a.m. on 90.7 FM, YouTube, and Facebook. We'll be right back.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation.
WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
It's WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org. This is One on One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org.
We are back on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Just after midnight in the East, we have officially made it to December 27th. Just a few more days in this year of 2020. We're taking you up until 2 a.m. on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. I'm Jimmy Sullivan, joined by Nick DeLuca and Andrew Posadas as well. You just heard him on the headlines, and the gang's all here to talk about the NBA. And there have been some interesting storylines in the first few days, and perhaps no team, granted in a couple of games, more impressive out of the jump than has been the Brooklyn Nets. They have amassed two big victories, one over the Warriors on opening night, and most recently against the Celtics on Christmas Day. They became the first team since the 2008-09 Lakers to win their first two games by 20 or more points. The Lakers went on to win the championship that year. Andrew Posadas, I will go to you first. I should give you some credit on Pick and Pod this week. You can find the full episode with you and Kelly Bright on WFUVSports.org. I really enjoyed listening to it. But you said that the Brooklyn Nets were going to be the best team in the East. And as of right now, granted, it's early in the season and we have to keep emphasizing that. But if this team is fully operational or close to it, Andrew, they certainly look like they're going to make your prediction come true.
Yeah, Jimmy, you and I were texting back and forth during the game, and I think we both came to the same conclusion that if this team stays healthy, they should run through the East. And I mean, the offensive firepower is there. Obviously, KD, Kyrie, Karis LeVert, who everyone on Twitter is now calling Manu LeVert. And I think everyone is penciling him in for that Sixth Man of the Year award. That offense, we know what they can do. They're potent, and they can go off for 120 points whenever they want. But I think really it's defensively, Jimmy. You see all that length that they have. KD, a lanky defender. Jared Allen, DeAndre Jordan. They can come off with Taurean Prince. Joe Harris has proven to be a solid defender in this league. So is Karis LeVert. I think the defense is only going to get better. And when you think about it, Nick, this is a team. We haven't seen KD and Kyrie on the court yet. A lot of people were wondering, should they make that trade for James Harden, give away this depth, and bring in that third superstar? But so far, it looks like Steve Nash has everything he needs in order to win a championship. I think all it needs is just some more time, more cohesion. But the Brooklyn Nets right now have to be the team to beat in the East when you look at all the firepower they have from positions 1 to 5.
I'm with you 100% with the way that they have played to open the season. And I know you don't want to overreact to just two games. They played two games, so you don't want to get into, oh my gosh, they're going to win the NBA Finals based upon what I've seen in the first two games. But at the same time, you really love what you see, what they've displayed and put on tape so far. And to me, the biggest thing is the defense that they've played, in addition to the health, right? Two things. It's the health and the defense. First and foremost, Kevin Durant looks like the dude that we last saw in Golden State, and that's important, right? He drops 29 points on Christmas Day. He was outstanding, and then in tandem with Kyrie Irving, who is also looking very healthy at 37 points against Boston. So these two are getting it done on the offensive side of the floor, but also with the firepower that they have. Everybody knows they're going to be able to score, and as you termed it, they can drop 120 points if they feel like it walking off the bus. That to me is what the Brooklyn Nets are. But if they can play good defense too, if they can show the attention to detail, the communication, and everything that goes into playing good defense, especially this early on, you're confident that they'll be able to sustain this. And that to me is the biggest message. Because if they're going in and they're playing good defense, we knew this team was going to come in and going to be able to score with the number of weapons that they have offensively. On defense, if they can get stops, which they have through the first two games, they're going to be in really good shape.
And the scary thing is, I think about their defense that, yes, they've played well. I think they could even play better. And Steve Nash was talking about that in the post game yesterday. He said, look, I mean, they haven't had a lot of time together. And there's been, some smaller mistakes within the game, which is to be expected when you just have not had, Kevin Durant on the floor, and Kyrie Irving only played 20 games last season. And that was to be expected. But, you and I, Andrew, as you were referencing, we're going back and forth yesterday, and they've got three guys, the Nets do. Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Karis LeVert, who could just take over the game on command, right? You look at the Christmas Day game that the Nets have, right? They, had an okay first half, kind of sputtered to halftime. It was a close game. They come out in the third quarter, and Kevin Durant is getting whatever he wants, right? They cannot stop him. He's putting up mid-range jumpers. It's impossible to defend somebody like that at 7 feet who is still so mobile after the injury. I mean, he looks like he's probably like 99% of what he was when he was in Golden State. So then the Celtics say, all right, we're going to get the ball out of his hands. And then they go to Kyrie Irving for the finishing punch, and he finishes with 37 points. It's so hard to defend because they're putting out different lineup combinations. They put LeVert out there with KD and Kyrie yesterday, as opposed to the first game where he was more kind of running the second unit. And, that seemed to work as well. Like Steve Nash is still figuring out what works and what doesn't with this team right now. And I think that's the frightening thing, is that, it's early in the season, and again, granted, 2 games. So, we're going to see a lot more of this team, and we'll have a better sense of maybe where they can be beaten in the playoffs, if that's possible. But they're still figuring it out here. And here they are destroying the Warriors on opening night. I mean, the Warriors, I think, are not very good. So you don't take that one as seriously. But, I mean, the Celtics are a really good team. And the Nets in the second half ran away with that game. And I think that's really impressive on their part, Andrew.
Yeah, and I would say this about Steve Nash. He's really been put, I think, into the best situation I think a rookie head coach has ever had. I think about, Pat Riley getting the job with the Lakers and inheriting, Magic and Kareem, Phil Jackson getting, Michael and an up-and-coming Scottie Pippen. You could say Popovich going in with getting Tim Duncan. And then obviously Steve Kerr inheriting what was there that Mark Jackson was able to build it in Golden State. But I think the credit has to go to 2 guys, and that's Jacque Vaughn and Mike D'Antoni. They're really playing the offensive and defensive coordinators, if you would, to take an NFL term, for the Brooklyn Nets. And I think that's working. Just letting Mike D'Antoni fixate on the offense, just letting Jacque Vaughn fixate on the defense. I think that's proving wonders. And for Steve Nash, he can kind of take a step back and really learn from them and kind of come along as a rookie head coach. And again, for the Nets, when you compare them to the rest of the East, I obviously the Bucks, if they would have gotten Bogdanovich, I might have taken the Bucks over the Nets. But are you going to take Giannis and Drew Holiday over a healthy KD and Kyrie? No. The Raptors, the Heat, while they have great teams and they have depth, are you going to take that depth over the Brooklyn Nets depth if they stay healthy? No. And, you can even go with the Sixers with Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons. You're not taking that duo over a healthy KD and Kyrie. And again, I think health is going to be it. But Nick, at the end of the day, I think the main question is, if the Brooklyn Nets are going to play like this, are they good enough to dethrone LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and the defending champion Los Angeles Lakers?
Question that everybody wants to know. And I think if they play like this, they certainly are capable of it, and it's possible. Now, I don't know that I'd go in and pick it because of LeBron's track record and the resume, and Anthony Davis has been outstanding since he's been in Los Angeles, and they have added to their already pretty darn good roster as well into this season. And you also feel like with the craziness and everything that's going on, the continuity of the Lakers now having played together in this sort of format for at least 2 years. This is LeBron's 3rd year, but this roster looks a lot different from the year 1. So you're trying to figure all that stuff out. Whereas the Nets, although most of them have played together for a number of years now, the additions of Kyrie and KD playing together and how all that fits, especially with Steve Nash as your head coach and D'Antoni and Vaughn and running everything that they all want to run. So it would be interesting. Hard to say right now, 2 games in, but they're certainly capable. I think that's what they proved, right? You had to come in and prove that you were healthy. They have done that. proved that they can certainly on offense was what we expected, and they have done that. They are what as advertised on the offensive side of the floor. And then defensively, they have checked that box as well in playing really good defense early on. And I agree with what Steve Nash said and what you guys have said as well. They can get better. They can improve on that side of the floor as well. So they are certainly in that conversation. They are in that realm. Whether or not they're winning, it's 2 games in. So let's not get carried away here. But they're capable of doing it. They have proven they are capable of doing it. And I think that's as good as it gets for the Nets 2 games in.
Before we move on to the Knicks, just want to put it out there. Kyrie Irving has played 147 games in the past 3 years. Kevin Durant is coming back off an Achilles. Karis LeVert was hurt at various points last year. Yes, you had Spencer Dinwiddie on the team last season, putting up massive numbers by necessity. If the Nets were to fall short of expectation this year, I think that's probably the likeliest reason. And yeah, I picked Milwaukee out of the East, but after seeing what we've seen from the Nets, I'm trying very hard not to overreact, but this is fun to watch.
And Jimmy, I would just add, I think it plays in the Nets' favor. It's just a shortened 72-game season, and there's time towards the end of the season before the postseason to make up games. So if the Nets, if they don't have to make up any games, they'll have a few weeks to get rested and get guys where they need to be. So I think this season in particular really plays in the favor of the Brooklyn Nets if all things goes well.
Yeah, and we'll see just how well things go for the Brooklyn Nets, because I think that's more the question for them. Moving to the other New York team, things not obviously going as well for the New York Knicks, and we've talked about that for a while. But the Knicks lost the other night to the Pacers, 121-107. RJ Barrett, really, really good for New York. Shot at 11 of 15, scored 26 points. More concerning, perhaps, for the Knicks is injuries to some of their young players. Obi Toppin and Emmanuel Quickly, both doubtful for tonight's game against the 76ers. Obi Toppin struggled in game 1, 9 points, 3 of 12 shooting. Guys, I'll go to you first, Nick. Not going to spend too much time on the Knickerbockers, but what are we looking for out of them this season? Because I think most of the expectations for them are they're not going to be very good. Maybe they'll be more competitive under Tom Thibodeau, but what is it that you're looking for as this season progresses out of the New York Knicks?
Growth from the young players is the biggest thing, because honestly, if the Knicks were to go out and be competitive and it's because of, say, Julius Randle really putting the team on his back, I don't know that you're achieving what you want to achieve. So it's from the really young players. It's RJ Barrett playing well the way he did on opening night, the 26 points on 11 of 15 from the field. That is really the message and what the Knicks want to accomplish this year. Obi Toppin struggled. You mentioned the injuries, and you're hoping that he can come around. Kevin Knox in the same way. And you just look at some of the younger players that they want to get on track and building toward the future, because it's evident that's the way they're going to have to try and climb back into being relevant in the NBA. So that to me is the biggest thing. Again, they can win. They can. I don't know. I don't want to say that the wins and the losses don't matter, because there's no way it's a chicken. And there's no way that you get the wins without the improvement and the good play from your young players. But to separate the two, it's not necessarily about the winning and the losing in that sense. And I know that is got to be incredibly frustrating for Knicks fans to hear, because there's been a lot of losing for a number of years. But to me, getting this team to where they want to go is about the development of the young players. No one is saying that the Knicks are a serious threat to winning playoff games this year. So at that level, playoffs or not, I don't think matter. Not that I'm predicting they will be in the realm of making the playoffs, but it's about the development of Barrett, Toppin, Knox, and others.
Yeah, if you're a Knicks fan, I think the expectation is, can the Knicks play like they did in the first half against the Pacers? Because that was a team that was efficient on both ends. I mean, you mentioned RJ Barrett. He had 20 in the first half. I think he was 9 of 9. And defensively, I mean, guys were able to be there. Obviously, Sabonis and Miles Turner were able to kind of break down Noel, Mitchell Robinson, Julius Randle, get them into foul trouble. But that first half, that's what Tom Thibodeau, that's what he said he wants to see more. And he said they played 24 minutes of good basketball, but to win on the road and to win consistently, you have to be able to do more than just that. And obviously quickly hurting his hip at halftime and not coming back, I think that hurt. And I think for Obi Toppin settling for a bunch of 3-point shots, that's not his game. I got to watch him at Dayton, and that's not his strong suit. He's a guy who needs to be in the pick and roll and go to the basket and get easy shots in the painted area. But again, can we get more of what we saw in the first half? Because if we see that, Jimmy, then that's a Knicks team that's going to be competitive. Obviously, probably won't make the playoffs, but that's a team that can win. Can they win 30 to 35 games? Perhaps. That won't be enough to get them in the playoffs, we think. But can they be competitive night in and night out? I think if anything, that first half gives you optimism. But again, with all those young players, as DeLuca just mentioned, it's still a process. And for Coach Thibodeau, he's going to have to take it day in and day out if he wants to get this team and get this franchise back to where a lot of people think they should be. And that's right at the forefront, in the NBA.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up if they go 30-42 in the East. I mean, stranger things have happened. The East is what it is, particularly at the bottom half of the playoff picture. And it's interesting you bring up Obi Toppin because you got to see him in person. I mean, you and I practically overdosed on watching Obi Toppin last year at Dayton in a good way. And his success, as you mentioned, transition, pick and roll in the post. Like that was where most of his plays and success came from. And here he is shooting spot up threes, like practical moonshots, and it's not working. And that's not how he's going to succeed. It could be how he succeeds in the NBA in a year or two's time, but that's not who he is right now. He needs to play to his game. They need to play to his game a little better. But it is about the young guys, right? I mean, Kevin Knox looked good in the preseason. And there was a game against the Cavaliers where they had everything working in the preseason. Mitchell Robinson, I think it's kind of frustrating because it feels like he really hasn't improved his game that much since coming into the league. But we'll see what winds up happening with the Knicks. But if they can be more competitive, if the young guys can develop, I think you'll take that as a successful season. That is probably devoid of higher expectations, just because this team is it's not very good, and I think that's what the Knicks have been talking about for the past several years. Andrew, good to be talking basketball with you. You'll be back towards the end of our show today. Nick and I will be back after the break talking college football, CFP, this week, Friday, New Year's Day, a couple of games and maybe some deeper issues with college football to talk about as well. We're on 90.7 Facebook and YouTube, taking you until 2 a.m. We'll be back after this break.
WFUV is the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. Keep it locked right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVSports.org to catch every Fordham basketball game this year. We'll take you through an extraordinary season with live play-by-play and in-depth pregame and postgame analysis. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
1-on-1, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Nick and Jimmy with you up until 2 a.m. here on the East Coast. Nick, you just sent me a tweet during the break. Jaguars are going to start Mike Glennon later today against the Bears. So a tanktastic move from the Jaguars, and congratulations to them on getting Trevor Lawrence, quite frankly, because I'm trying to reverse psychology this, where I lower the expectations and then maybe they go out and win. Who knows? I don't know. But that's where...
It's a tough life, Jimmy. I'm sorry. The truth hurts.
Yeah, hey, what can you do? I mean, this is where we're at as Jets fans. It's actually really pathetic that we're having this conversation. But, hey, that's the way it is. We can't all be in the playoffs and hosting home playoff games like the Buffalo Bills. But that's okay. So let's move over to the college side now, and a lot to get into here, both good and bad. We've got the college football playoff, Alabama and Notre Dame in the Rose Bowl, which will be held in Texas this year, and you've got Clemson and Ohio State in the Sugar Bowl. Those are the two semifinals, national title game on the 11th of January. But Nick, every year we have this conversation about the college football playoff. This is probably the most I've heard before it actually happens of finality, of people saying they're saying, all right, it's going to be Alabama, Clemson. We're going to have two blowouts, particularly, I think, in the Notre Dame game. And it's really odd when you think about, there are four teams here who are all 2 wins away from a championship. And a lot of people, especially individuals who do not have skin in this game, are sitting there and saying, no, it's going to be 2 blowouts, and we're going to get Alabama, Clemson yet again in the title game. And I just find that really interesting and odd, and maybe indicative of deeper issues that we're dealing with the CFP.
I think it is indicative of deeper issues, and we'll get to that in a moment. But when you look at the two matchups, I don't really see how they're not blowouts. There's no way that Notre Dame stays with Alabama. That's just the reality of it. They're not built to beat in Alabama. I don't know that anybody is in the country, but in particular, Notre Dame is not. Where Alabama has struggled this year, if they have struggled at all, it has been with offenses that can light up the scoreboard and have really strong passing attacks. That was Ole Miss in a game that was close this year. That was the SEC championship game against Florida, and a great quarterback in Kyle Trask, a guy who was up for the Heisman Trophy nomination. Notre Dame doesn't have that. They're a team that wants to play good defense if they can, and they want to run the ball. And they want to control the clock, and they want to have Ian Book not be put in too difficult a situation to let him manage the game. They're not wanting to put it on Ian Book's shoulders to go out and win you the football game. And that's what every quarterback needs to do when you play Alabama. And you just question whether or not they're capable of doing it to the point where it's not going to be competitive, right? They went out, and when they played Clemson full strength, they laid an egg. This has been something that we've seen from Notre Dame time and time again the last few years of their program's history. And as I said on the podcast, Jimmy, I'm trying to be respectful to this individual group of players because they don't deserve to necessarily get looped in with the rest of Notre Dame's history, particularly recently. But at the same time, this has just not been a program that's been able to compete on the national stage and in the college football playoff stage very well. It just hasn't been close, and I don't expect that'll change against Alabama. The same way Clemson, Ohio State, Ohio State doesn't impress me a lot, and I think you're there too, Jimmy, in seeing all that stuff. But Clemson looks really good. Trevor Lawrence, don't want to remind Jets fans, but he looks really good, and their offense is good. And you have confidence in their defensive staff and health with Brent Venables running a defense that is slowly and steadily getting more healthy and knows what they want to do. Ohio State is so young in the secondary. They've got a good front seven, but you feel like Clemson will still be able to run the football. And offensively against Northwestern, and look, Northwestern is as good as it gets in the FBS on defense. They just struggled so mightily passing the football, and were able to kind of get bailed out by running for 400 yards if that type of thing exists. they're not running for 400 yards against Clemson. So I like the Tigers in that matchup too.
It's interesting, Nick. Before we get back into more serious discussion, there was a video on social media. I don't know if you saw it. There was a woman who was wearing all Notre Dame gear, watching the playoff selection show from her house. And I'm guessing she probably like went to Notre Dame because she seemed like a really, really big Notre Dame fan. And it was hilarious because on the show they revealed the top 3, and then like they did a little drum roll, and then they revealed the 4th team. So it was so bad. She so badly did not want to play Alabama that she is sitting there pulling for it to be, Texas A&M or Cincinnati or Oklahoma, anybody else but Notre Dame, so that they wouldn't have to play Alabama. She would rather them not be in the playoff than play Alabama. And they revealed Notre Dame, and she just like pulled the shirt over her face. It was really funny. But I feel like this is crazy because I could never imagine being 2 wins away from a championship and everybody going in saying, oh yeah, it's over. Like there's no chance. And yet this is where Notre Dame is. And I think it's kind of by default this year because we've talked about this over the past few years. There's a real gulf between Bama, Clemson, and everybody else. And that's where college football is right now. But then the discussion moves to how to fix it because, yeah, I'm with you on these matchups. I think if one of these games is going to be close, it's the Clemson-Ohio State game. But Ohio State hasn't given you any reason to think that they're going to play with and or beat Clemson. They just haven't done that. Where I think the discussion moves now is how do we work on this? Because, Nick, you've been on the expansion train for a while. I've kind of hopped on the expansion train this year. Is it a 16 playoff? Is it an 18 playoff? A 16-team playoff? And we've talked about this on the podcast. You can listen on WFUVsports.org. But there's a lot of issues with the playoff right now, and not to go back and cover terrain that we've already talked about, you and I, but what is it exactly that we could fix this system to maybe have more competitive games leading up to the national title game where the 2 best teams will face off?
The more I think about it, the more that 16 sort of actually makes sense, as crazy as that sounds. And I have not been an advocate of 16. My whole thing was originally 6, but then when you look at the landscape and you want to have a concrete criteria for who gets in, so I've then sort of gone to 8 because I think that number makes sense. And you don't want to give the top 2 teams in the country such an advantage in that sort of situation, especially over what they already have in not having to play the first round matchup of a 6-team playoff. That way, if it's 8, you can guarantee if you're a Power 5 conference champion, you're in regardless of what the record is. That's an automatic bid. You sort of grab a group of 5 team in, and then you got the 2 wild cards, and that's how you round out your 8. But it becomes so apparent that the playoff is sort of taken over the landscape of college football. That is the measuring stick. That is what success is. Whereas beforehand, when you had the BCS national championship, winning your conference was a big deal, or winning the Orange Bowl was a big deal, or the Rose Bowl, or whatever bowl game it was. Now it's all playoff, and nobody cares that you won the Big Ten. It doesn't matter. Ohio State doesn't care that they won the Big Ten. They want to win the college football national championship. Alabama doesn't care that they won the SEC insofar as it helps them win the college football playoff national championship. And it is sort of from a recruiting standpoint where everything runs through in college football. That is the lifeblood, your ability to recruit and get the best players into your program. And that's why the number of coaches who are getting paid $10+ million exist, because Nick Saban is as good as it gets in getting the best players to come to Alabama, and Dabo Swinney and Lincoln Riley and all those coaches who have been so successful. So to me, it's about creating that level playing field in recruiting. It's not about, oh, hey, well, Cincinnati should have been in. They deserve a shot at the playoff and they were left out. We all know that Alabama would boat race Cincinnati. No one is saying that that game would be close. The key is finding a way to get rid of these matchups where there is a crater, a canyon between Alabama and Notre Dame. How can these 2 programs recruit on a more equal level? And as you go up and down the playoff rankings? How does Cincinnati recruit on the same level as Alabama? How do you level that playing field? And to me, the answer is if you expand the playoff, you can sell to recruits. We have an opportunity to play in the playoff. Because if, pick a random team, it was sort of towards 16. Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern cannot, with a straight face, go into a recruit's house or now FaceTime the recruit and say, we can go and win in the playoff. The recruit's going to laugh him out of the door and say, you're ridiculous. You're Northwestern. You're not getting into the playoff. Whereas if you go to 8, where you go to 16, now there's a shot. Now you can recruit on that level, on that premise. And I think that will create more equity in college football.
Interesting you bring up the 16. The last team in your system, if you're just going straight top 16, would be BYU. Other notables who would be in, who I don't even think were in the playoff conversation this year: Indiana, Coastal Carolina, North Carolina, Northwestern, Iowa. They'd all be in. That's 11 through 15 here. I think, and this year has kind of radicalized me in a sense that I'm also now in favor of expansion, just because we see the semifinals every year. For the most part, they're blowouts. That's what we've seen since the start of the college football playoff. And you talk about going to 16, and people will say, well, logistically, that's really hard. Let me tell you something. If 2020's taught us anything, logistically, you can do whatever you want if you put your mind to it, right? The best game this season was a game that didn't exist the Wednesday before the Saturday it was played. I'm talking about BYU Coastal Carolina here. But in any event, I would say, and we talked about this on the podcast, I think for now, if you're going to do this incrementally, I would go to 8, and I would say, look, you win your conference, automatic bid. So, you put Oregon in from the Pac-12. I mean, are they necessarily a top 8 team? Probably not. But the thing is, the biggest problem I have with the playoff right now is that the criteria feels like it changes all the time. And, are we going with the best teams, the best deserving, the best resume? Like, what are we doing here? And that's been extremely inconsistent. A way to get rid of that is to have automatic bids. So you're a Power 5 team, you win your conference, boom, you're in. No questions asked. I would put in the top group of 5 team. I know that there might be some years where that might be a 2 or 3 loss team, but you have to make it, I think, so that they feel like they have a chance. Because right now, no matter what the committee says, like a group of 5 team cannot make the playoff. Like, that's just where we are. They could wax poetic about Cincinnati or Coastal Carolina, whoever they want. It's just the reality of the situation that no matter what they do, I think, quite frankly, even if they go out and play great teams, which they couldn't really do this year, that's just not going to happen. But I do think that having those automatic bids, and then you have 2 at-larges. So, like, if you want to put in Florida from this year, for example, or you want to put in, Texas A&M, which is probably a better example than Florida. If you feel like those are the 2 best teams that didn't win a conference title, that aren't the best group of 5 team, you do it. But I think you and I can both agree that what we are doing right now, it's not working. And, you and I think, are both in agreement on that we need to have some kind of fundamental change, because I'm telling you, I'm going into Friday afternoon's games. I'm sitting on my couch and I'm expecting to just be scrolling through Twitter by the 3rd or 4th quarter. Definitely in the Alabama game, maybe in the Clemson game as well. But I am not expecting particularly close games. It's nothing against Ohio State or Notre Dame, but I have a hard time seeing one or both of them competing in those games.
No, and they've ruled college football for the last how many years, right? It's been Clemson and Alabama. That's who wins, with few exceptions, but those are the 2 teams that have been there toward the end of it for however many years now. So to me, that's the biggest key and the biggest focus, because it's not about saying, well, Cincinnati should have gotten in at number 8, so we got to just find a spot for them in the college football playoff. No, we have to find a way for Cincinnati in the scope of college football to be competitive against Alabama. Or if it's not Cincinnati, if the group of 5, it's not possible, then at least Texas A&M. There should be another team in your conference that can sit there and give you a run for your money. So to me, that's the biggest thing. And if 8 is the right incremental step, I don't disagree. Like I'm not sitting there and saying it should definitely go to 16. Like I'm back and forth with it because it just, you feel like 16, that's such a watered down regular season then. And that's what you love about college football, of everything having such an importance. And you feel like 8 could sort of maintain that. So maybe 8 is the right step. And potentially, if that's going to create enough of a diversity in recruiting, then you're in good shape. I'm just not so sure that it does. But at some point, there needs to be an incentive for 30% of the 5-star recruits that are in the country in 2021 to not say, I want to go to Alabama and Ohio State. There needs to be some diversity in that arena. So however it gets there, then we get there. But to me, that's the change that needs to be made. It's not just, oh, Cincinnati deserves a shot or the group of 5 deserves a shot in that sense. It's about, we need more equity in recruiting.
It's also interesting. You brought up, I think, a really good point about the fading significance of the other New Year's Six bowls, I should say, because what we've seen in those games, less people watch those games because there are 2 bowl games that are semifinals every year, and everything else feels like an appetizer to that. Like, that's a terrible thing to say about, the Cotton Bowl, for example, or the Fiesta Bowl, because those in the past were really big games. It is just the way it is, though, unfortunately. And, I think one way maybe even to fix that is maybe you have those games as quarterfinals, right? You have the 2 that are the semifinal games every year. Those rotate, right? So this year it's the Rose Bowl, albeit not in Pasadena, and the Sugar Bowl. Maybe you have the other 4 that are not in that discussion as semifinals. Now, I know there are some issues, or at least there have been in the past, with the Rose Bowl and the Sugar Bowl moving off New Year's Day, because that's been a real issue. But hey, I mean, maybe that's a way to increase the significance of those games. Who knows? I'm kind of just throwing stuff out there right now to basically try to fix college football. I think I should be the commissioner of the NCAA. But
I trust you, Jimmy.
Thank you. I would trust you too. Like if you and I were running, like if it was an election or something, like
I think we'd be in good shape. I'm with you there.
It's the rare, like, low stakes election. Like whoever wins, like, I think you feel fine about it. Nonetheless, but you do bring up a good point, right? North Carolina is playing in the Orange Bowl. They're playing Texas A&M. If North Carolina wins that game, let's just throw that out there. Mac Brown can go into a living room and say, hey, we won the Orange Bowl. That's cool. But is that going to be the selling point when they also have one of the best recruiting classes in college football, right? He could sit there and say, oh, we've gotten all these other guys. And that will probably come first before he brings up whatever bowl game they win. In this case, I'm hypothetically speaking, the Orange Bowl. So I think that's also a really interesting point. I was really glad you brought it up, because winning the Fiesta Bowl, the Orange Bowl, winning a game that isn't a semifinal but is a New Year's Six Bowl, I just don't think it's what it used to be. And I think that's another problem too, because Alabama and Clemson, as you said, they're in the playoff every year, and Dabo Swinney and Nick Saban can go into a kid's living room and have dinner with them and basically say, all right, you want to go play in the playoff? And they say yes, and then they sign on the dotted line.
And it, to me, is even a little bit more finite than that. Just as we wrap all this stuff up, you gotta even sell that you can win in the playoff now too.
Yes.
That's the other thing. Like, I don't even know if you're recruiting on Brian Kelly's level, where, at Notre Dame right now, you sell that, yeah, we can get into the playoff, but can we win? Because Notre Dame hasn't been able to do that. So to me, that's the other part of this, where it's almost not even can we even get there. It's can we win? And Notre Dame has not proven that they can do that. Even in Oklahoma, right? Lincoln Riley in that same way. Now, if I'm a quarterback, I want to go to Oklahoma because that seems to make you a lot of money in the NFL. So they're still okay on the quarterback recruiting. But even so, if you're another player, are we able to compete in the playoff? It's tough business, and I think that's really where it starts.
Certainly is tough business. Nick, I'm assuming you think we're going to get Bama Clemson again in the title game. I don't even know why I'm asking
I'm
that.
with you there, Jimmy.
Yeah, I do too. That's where I'm at. I will say though, Dabo Swinney, and I said this on the podcast, with the stuff he has said about Ohio State, they have bulletin board material for years based on
They
just
have
what
it
he
for
is.
next year's playoff.
Yes, just what he said over the last week or two about Ohio State. For example, in the coaches poll, he ranked them 11th. Obviously, for context, they're ranked 3rd in the playoff rankings. In an interview, I think it was with ESPN, he said they asked him about watching film, and he said, "Well, they only played 6 games, so it's not going to be particularly difficult." So I don't think it will matter, but if Ohio State were to somehow win this game, let me tell you, that's all we're going to be hearing about in the offseason. It's, you can whip out the Michael Jordan meme about taking that personally, but that's what Ohio State's going to be riding it on. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to matter, but I do think it's worth bringing up. So now that Nick and I have fixed college football, we move on with the rest of our show. Coming up next, we'll play part of our interview as part of Off the Air, the podcast with Jake Kring-Schreifels, a member of the Fordham class of 2014, a WFUV alum. Got into a lot of different stuff with him. Nick and I had a really good conversation with Jake. Looking forward to letting you hear part of that next. One-on-one, taking you up until 2 a.m. Stay with us.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVSports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Off the Air podcast. We're glad you're with us. I'm Jimmy Sullivan, joined by Nick DeLuca, also joined by Jake Kring-Schreifels. He is a former managing editor and staff writer for the Washington football team, also worked as a senior editor for the New York Yankees, has written articles that have been featured in the New York Times, The Atlantic, GQ, The Ringer, Esquire, MLB.com, and many others. And just recently, he accepted a job as an assistant editor for The Doe, which challenges the ways people engage with new ideas. And most importantly, for our purposes, he is a member of the class of 2014 and a WFUV alum. Jake, forgive me for rambling on about your resume. Thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. I haven't really heard that all together since I started this new position. So it's a nice little intro for me. I appreciate it.
Hey, you got to get all that stuff out there, right? Let me ask you to start. I know it's kind of an obvious question. Just how much has your life changed in the past 9 months or so as we all deal with this pandemic and our new ways of life?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, so many ways. You think about everything that's happened in New York City, where I've been located. That was a very scary time, as you guys know, and New York was kind of at the epicenter. But just from a career perspective and work perspective, it is drastically different. I was starting January, February, traveling to Yankee Stadium every day. It is my office. And we were planning for a new season, had some editors go to spring training, getting the yearbook ready to go. And then all of a sudden, in fact, we even had a meeting at Yankee Stadium all the employees, I think a doctor came and explained, look, I think this is going to be okay. We're going to be able to get fans in the stands. It's not as bad outdoors. It's not like that. Of course, come March, everything has changed. And now I'm at a new job, and everything is remote. And I haven't met a single one of my colleagues in person. It's all over Zoom. So yeah, it has been very different for me this year, and a lot of different changes just in terms of the way I work, what I'm working on itself, moving out of the sports world in some respects. There's been so many different things I could probably tackle, and we can talk about. But yeah, a lot of new things for me in 2020, as many can say.
You mentioned some of the changes, a lot of the changes that all of us have been going through, and you go up and down the list of this is different. What has been the most difficult transition for you since the pandemic hit?
Gosh, I would say, the interpersonal communication and ability to kind of work as a team was always the best part, at least for my job with Washington and in an editorial staff. There's so much of, well, how do we figure out a newsroom situation that can work for everybody? And I think everyone's been struggling with the way that newsrooms have had to adapt. I'm sure at FUV, even that small newsroom you have, it's a nice opportunity to spit ideas at each other, to have conversations and build rapport. That was really lost when I was with the Yankees and we kind of had to go remote, and, you just don't have those opportunities to engage with each other. And then the fact that you have a job now where I'm doing everything remotely. We've tried to create that same atmosphere over Zooms and over our Slack groups and different ways that we communicate over messaging systems, but it's been a difficult transition that way. I think I've learned to be able to figure out how to communicate better with just texting and emailing, and trying not to read into too much silence here and there, and being accountable with what you have to do, getting your work done without knowing exactly when the workday ends for everybody at the same time, and not checking into an actual office space anymore. You're kind of waking up and deciding, well, I should boot up my computer and get going. So I think all of that has been the biggest transition for me, is just trying to learn how to be more accountable with myself and figure out how to function the best with other people's work schedules.
Jake, maybe moving over to lighter subjects now. And I introduced you as a member of the class of 2014 at Fordham. You spent a lot of time at WFUV in your 4 years at the school. If you don't mind, I want you to take me back to when you were finishing up high school, starting college. What exactly was it that attracted you to WFUV in the first place, that made you sit there and say, okay, I want to be a part of that?
Well, I didn't know a lot about WFUV when I came into Fordham. I would say I had a good understanding that there was an NPR radio station. There were some opportunities there to pursue journalism in that area. If I were to go to Fordham, I went and got a nice little lecture, toured around a little bit when I was still looking at schools. And I wasn't necessarily sure if radio was a thing for me or not. And I think that opening college fair, all around Eddie's Parade, you kind of go around and you go to the different tables and you start figuring out what you want to maybe sign up for. I knew journalism was an area that I was interested in for sure. So I signed up for the RAM, but I had heard a lot of good things about the radio station being an opportunity to get a lot of reporting opportunities, to get on the air. And I thought, well, why don't I try this? It seems like a legit professional place. And so, immediately, you meet Bob Aarons, who was then executive producer, and all of a sudden you start to realize, okay, I think this is the right decision. So again, to kind of answer, I didn't really have a ton of expectations in terms of what FUV's legacy was, what its real opportunity was for me, until I started kind of just talking with some friends. I saw a couple guys that were interested in sports and in radio, and it just made sense. Why don't we try to do this together? It was a good collaboration of. It was a great way to make some friends, and eventually that turned into a full year of training. That was, it just opened up my horizons to what I could do in terms of journalism, but also just making so many different connections in the industry, and then learning about it, obviously the legacy, which is just incredible. So really was more, I'm going to figure out what this is. And then it turned out to be a great decision.
So you make that decision and you get into your time at WFUV and all of the things that entails, whether it be covering professional sports teams or just going into a Fordham game, whatever that might be, basketball, football. Was there a moment, whether it is covering a game, doing one-on-one, being on the air, where you sat back and said, this is something that I want to do?
Yeah, I actually vividly remember the first time I went to a major league stadium to cover it as a reporter. I have also been a very big fan of movies and writing about entertainment and culture. And I remember reading the book Moneyball, which had been a few years old at that point, but they just started to make a movie was coming out with Brad Pitt that year, 2011. And so I thought, I look at the Mets roster and I looked at the Yankees roster, and Jason Isringhausen is there in the Mets, and Nick Swisher and Eric Chavez were on the Yankees at the time. And I thought, let me ask Bob if I could potentially go and do a cool story about Moneyball all these years later, and how these guys have made their careers, and based off, Billy Beane and this whole revolutionized way of thinking about baseball. And so I remember going to the Mets locker room and figuring out how to approach a player. It was probably the scariest thing. I remember putting up a mic to this relief pitcher, and I had really no idea what I was doing. And, it was one of those first moments where you come away and you're like, I did that. I was in the Mets clubhouse with all these established New York reporters, and I just went and talked to a baseball player about a personal story that I wanted to do. And so I eventually talked to Nick and Eric and put a little story together for the website as we were building it at the time. And it was a really great opportunity for me to realize, okay, this is what I could make of something here. I could kind of find my creative niche, which is kind of merging some sports culture, some entertainment, and figuring out a way to create something that has been, I've been passionate about for a while. And I really felt like, wow, this is it. This is what I can do. This is what FUV is providing me. So that was kind of one of those pinch me, welcome to the show moments in some respects.
For sure. And Jake, you're talking about your various interests being sports, entertainment, movies, whatever. And you also have a very wide range of skills. And, throughout your career, you've done a number of different jobs since being at WFUV. I'm curious, with all the different things you can do at FUV, how did the versatility you might have learned in your time at FUV help you as you went out into the workforce, did a bunch of different jobs, held a bunch of different roles, and did them all well?
Mm-hmm. It was great. It was vital to kind of figure out a way to kind of immerse yourself in so many of the facets of FUV. And I mentioned the website earlier, right? I didn't think we really had much of a website presence. And I think that's one of the things that I worked on with Mike Watts, who you guys know, and Kenny Ducey. We really figured we needed to promote our work there. And so because FUV is a student-run place for the most part, and especially FUV Sports was, we figured we could really kind of build this thing ourselves. And so we spent a lot of time working on social media and sharing our work there. We spent time on our website and trying to make sure that our podcasts and all of our radio clips and one-on-one interviews were all kind of stored there and into a nice public vault. And so that was a way that we all kind of took it to the next level in some ways and figured we're doing this, but how can we do even more and share what we're doing? So that was another way where I felt like, okay, I think we can make this what we want it to be, and it's not just radio and we go home. And so that was so fundamental in terms of what I was doing with Washington later on and working in social media and the website editing, but also learning how to interview people on the spot, doing podcasts, all that kind of stuff. And I just kind of threw myself into it. I was not huge into play-by-play. I knew that just wasn't a big passion of mine, but I knew that the radio station was so great because it had all these other opportunities for me. And to be clear, I also was very much invested in the pep band. I was a trumpet player. And so I knew I wasn't really going to be able to be at a lot of games doing play-by-play or color commentary for basketball or football. I was still very much invested in music. And that was another opportunity for me to see the game from another perspective, see behind the scenes, but also just learning the different ways in which even game time entertainment is around. And so I've always kind of been interested in the very different aspects of sports. And I think just being around different areas within the station, not just solely investing in play-by-play, which is kind of the, Marty Glickman and that award is so tailored to guys who want to do that for a living. And I just didn't find that was my lane, but WFUV provided so much for me to be able to get out of that. So yeah, I mean, that was a really great opportunity to kind of figure out different ways to kind of explain my skills and try new things that eventually, like you said, it really does help you later on. You have so many skill sets that you can use in different ways because you figure out how to change and find your own path through it.
Jake, from a broader perspective, how much did the experiences that you got at WFUV covering games in a professional setting prepare you for what came next in your career?
That definitely helped a lot. I mean, like I mentioned, that first baseball clubhouse experience, you get your you get your reps in there and you get the shakes out, as it were. And by the time I started going into the Washington football locker room, I mean, I had done this plenty of times. And I think that's the best part about WFUV was just you get all those core experiences that most people don't get until they graduate. So yeah, for me, I mean, it was really, really helpful to have so much of that banked experience. And, just the interactions and the things you learn watching other reporters too. I think that's another thing that people don't talk about enough. It's not just about asking questions and going up to a player. It's also observing, just the kind of the customs and the way that other sports reporters in that locker room interact with each other, the decorum that you're kind of supposed to have, and the way that you approach PR people about interview requests and all those kinds of little inner facets that I think probably don't get talked about when people start talking about their jobs and having beat opportunities. So that in itself, just learning the Yankees clubhouse and the way that functioned and watching other people report and sticking mics in between arms and learning all the angles there and strengthening your forearm in that way too. I just think that was really helpful to kind of take into a football experience where you're just kind of thrown on your own and you are kind of expected to just, okay, we need a story on this guy, get it done. Okay, well, I've been able to conquer this before. And so especially my first year or two there, and you start to develop relationships with players, you start to figure out things based on those key experiences for sure.
Jake, this might be a bit of a cliche question, but I'll probably go ahead and ask it anyway. If you could go back to your freshman year when you were starting at Fordham, you're trying to figure out exactly what you wanted to do. Mm-hmm. If you could go back and tell 18 or 19-year-old self one thing at the time, a piece of advice, just anything, what would it be?
Oh, man, I would probably say, for me, I majored in communications, and I think that was really helpful. I met some great professors and got to know a lot of kids, but FUV was my communications class, so to speak. And so I think if you knew, I knew that I wanted to do journalism and sports and entertainment and kind of get in that lane. And I knew that FUV was going to probably provide that for me for 4 years. So as both a work experience, but also as a place to just gain more knowledge about the industry. So I think for me going back, I would probably say, you don't have to major in communications. Let's maybe major in some history. Let's major in maybe even just English or something that would challenge me a little bit differently or give me a little bit more diversity. I think Fordham is great because it is that liberal arts college and there is so much. And I tried to expand that as I went on. I did minor in theology and Spanish and I got more of those perspectives. But I think even still, just having more experiences with other kinds of kids and students there and teachers and Jesuits, even, I think just really trying to expand your knowledge base and in a way that wasn't necessarily what FUV provided, because that really was the communications class. So I think overall, I probably would have said, just keep expanding, because all of that stuff really does help later on. And I know it probably isn't always in the moment, not during your 3-hour show when you're talking about why the Jets won a game the other week. That your theology doesn't probably come into that conversation, but it probably will impact you later down the road. You do have more experiences communicating with different people and learning different ways to interact with people that you might not normally. So just all those attributes, I think, will probably be helpful for me.
There you have it. Jake Kring-Schreifels. He is currently an assistant editor at The Doe and WFUV class of 2014. Jake, thank you so much for taking some time with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. This is great. And keep warm up there at Fordham.
Will do.
One-on-One has a brand new YouTube channel. Subscribe to WFUV Sports to catch our simulcast Saturday nights and get notifications so you never miss another show. Miss the show? You can find on-demand segments, interviews, and highlights every week. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics. WFUV and WFUV HD, New York. Listener-supported public media from Fordham, the Jesuit University of New York. Right here on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org. This is One-on-One, New York's longest-running sports call-in show on 90.7 FM, WFUV.org, and WFUVsports.org.
Welcome back to One-on-One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Just after 1 a.m. in the East, taking you up until 2 a.m. on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. So glad you could be with us. This is our last Saturday night / Sunday morning one-on-one of 2020. So certainly lucky and grateful that you could spend some time with us here as we wrap up the year. Nick DeLuca, Jimmy Sullivan with you. And Nick, I think we got to get into some baseball. The hot stove has been very quiet. There hasn't been too much going on. The Rangers made a signing yesterday in the international market, but otherwise really quiet market. And Nick, I want to start with the Yankees here, because if I was a fan of the Yankees, I'd be a bit concerned, frankly, with how they're conducting themselves this offseason. Not so much in the sense of who they're going to get, who they're not going to get, but you've got DJ LeMahieu, who is a free agent. You have the starting rotation situation in the way that it is. Nick, if you were, well, you are a Yankee fan. I am not. I'm a Mets fan. How concerned are you right now about the situation with DJ LeMahieu, the situation with the starting rotation, and really the way that this team is conducting itself in free agency right now.
I know I'm in the minority here, but I'm not really that concerned because I think that it really boils down to the track record that Brian Cashman has as the head of the Yankees baseball operation, being pretty darn good over the last 20 plus years. So there is the fan that wants everything to happen so quickly, and we've got to have this and that, and whatever the case may be. But to me, I'm confident with the plan that they have in place. I don't think that LeMahieu is going anywhere. These negotiations, particularly in this market, are not going to happen quickly. You want to make sure that they are bolstering their starting rotation in the right way, and I think maybe add a bullpen arm or two. But you're always confident that they have a plan and they understand exactly what the market is going to bear out and know really just when it boils down to it what they're doing. So maybe there is some concern in that the Yankees have not made the deal already. And as good as DJ LeMahieu has been over the last couple of years, anytime that he is not officially a New York Yankee is perhaps a trying time with what he's meant to their organization. But on the same hand here, you have to understand that these things do take time and be patient. And Cashman's track record has been excellent. So I know that there's the popular belief and understanding that, you know, the Mets have won free agency and the Mets are doing all these great things, but the Mets have signed James McCann, and that's all they've done too. So I think that that's just a product of the way the offseason is working more than anything else. And until moves start happening, I don't know how concerned anyone should be or how confident anyone should be.
It's wild. We're sitting here on December 27th. The Mets have probably done more than any team out there, and all they've done is sign Trevor May, a reliever, and James McCann, a catcher.
Right. I
And
miss
that's
Trevor May, but it's same
right.
thing. Yeah.
But it's not, the market's moving so slowly that nothing's really happening. Like, all the big fish are still out there, right? LeMahieu, Realmuto, Springer, Bauer, like all the big free agents that you want are still out there. What concerns me about LeMahieu is that it seems like they're not that far apart. Like, we've heard, 20 million, 25 million, whatever the number is, and maybe a year on that contract. The fact that they've had the opportunities to get it done and haven't concerns me. In the end, Nick, I agree with you that I don't think he's going anywhere. And people have talked about the Mets and DJ LeMahieu, which kind of works to generate clicks sometimes. I think the Mets are in on DJ LeMahieu insofar as to drive the price up on the Yankees or whoever winds up signing him.
Agreed.
I don't think that's a real interest because, frankly, DJ LeMahieu's not a fit on the Mets right now. Jeff McNeil's going to play second base next year when Robinson Cano is suspended a year. And granted, LeMahieu's a great hitter. Like, put him in my lineup any day of the week, but it's not as huge of a positional need right now as, say, a George Springer would be in the outfield or Trevor Bauer would be for the rotation. So I don't think that's going to happen. What's concerning for the Yankees is not just LeMahieu, though. It's also the starting rotation. And, Alex could throw up the graphic here, but, they've got a situation. They have James Paxton, Masahiro Tanaka, who are, out there. And if they don't bring those guys back, you're running into next season with a starting rotation that is like completely unacceptable. You have Garrett Cole starting the season. Luis Severino is going to come back mid-season. And then you've got, Montgomery and David Garcia and Michael King. Domingo Germán might get starts. Like, I think this might be a hot take, Nick. The starting rotation for the Yankees is just as big of a concern right now, I think, as DJ LeMahieu, because DJ LeMahieu has been great for the Yankees the last 2 years. They still haven't done what they've wanted to do with him. And I think the biggest need on this team right now is starting pitching. And the fact that not only are they, doesn't really seem like right now they're doing enough to address that, but, they might not even get the guys back that they had last year. And I think that is also a legitimate concern.
It may be a hot take in Yankee land or those who really feel strongly about bringing back DJ LeMahieu, but to me, it's not. I'm in 100% agreement with you in that. To me, I would rather make sure that they nail down having this quality rotation and bringing back who they need to bring back, or finding a different starting pitcher to bring in than even bringing back DJ LeMahieu. I think it's that important. Because as good as LeMahieu has been, and I know that might sound sacrilegious and ridiculous, but as good as LeMahieu has been, as you pointed out, they haven't gotten to where they wanted to go. And their lineup, in the criticism for them, is that they strike out and too many power hitters and they don't put the ball in play. Like DJ LeMahieu has been so good in a number of areas, and the reason that the Yankees have been successful with him is not just because he puts the ball in play. Like, he's just a really darn good hitter. So it's not just about finding the next guy who just comes in and puts the ball in play to replace he's just really good. But at the same time, they have put the ball in play more. Like last year in the playoffs in particular, that's the popular criticism of the Yankees lineup, that they're home run or bust. They rely on the home run ball too much. And if it's not there, they strike out and they can't move people. They were not striking out a ton throughout last season and into the postseason. And I know it's a small sample size and you want to protect against it. So I would certainly say that, hey, if you weren't to be able to bring back a DJ LeMahieu, Michael Brantley sounds like a good option B, just to make sure that you have somebody with that same type of skill set. But I'm in agreement with you in that the starting rotation is really the area of concern, because that's where things were problematic for the Yankees last year, right? I mean, Garrett Cole was on the whole excellent, had a couple of rough starts, and again, you're dealing with a 60-game sample size, but in the postseason, he was outstanding. But past Garrett Cole, it was like, what are we doing? And they need to iron out some aspects of their bullpen, and you're confident that they can have some of those guys maybe come back and pitch to their potential more than they did. But I'm with you. It's the starting rotation that to me is the biggest area of concern. And I think Luis Severino is going to be really impactful in coming back, again, as you mentioned, mid-season. But they need someone else. And I don't think it's going to be Masahiro Tanaka. I think he's going to be on his way out based upon reading the tea leaves from what Brian Cashman has said. And if it's James Paxton, I'm okay with that insofar as he's healthy, because I think James Paxton is a guy who's got a lot of upside and can be really good and was really good for the Yankees at times when he was healthy. I'm just not sure that was the case last year.
Yeah, and especially I think the starting rotation is important because of what we do not know about the Major League season next year, right? Players and owners are like negotiating this stuff out pretty much through the public, which we've gotten used to, I think, in the past year. And we don't know if there's going to be a DH. We also don't know what the playoffs going to exactly look like. And we had it at 16 last year. My gut instinct says it will be again. But what did we see in the playoffs last year? We saw that the teams with the most and best pitching depth were the ones that won. The Rays have a ton of depth, a bunch of guys they could turn to. In the end, in the World Series, they kind of turned to the wrong guys. That's where they failed. And the Dodgers obviously had a ton of depth as well. And those wound up being the two teams that were in it at the end. And if you have a 16-team format, if you have a similar scheduling to what you had last year, it's going to be the same situation. Like, it's going to be those types of teams that win. And right now, the Yankees don't have that depth. When you bring up who it is, I think that's a really interesting point. There was a report this week that the Reds were shopping Luis Castillo. Maybe that's an option the Yankees could pursue. Who knows? But, when you look at that rotation that I just listed off, and our producer Alex Wolves put the graphic up, you cannot go into the next season with that rotation. And yes, Severino's coming back. I get that. But you can't have that at the beginning of next year. And I think the Yankees are in a weird spot because everybody's saying, oh, go out and get Bauer. I love these internet people. The Mets have the same thing where it's like, get this person, get that person. You can get everybody. They haven't indicated the willingness to do that. They're with a lot of other teams and saying, hey, we're not going to spend like huge this offseason. They just gave $300+ million to Garrett Cole. That they're not going to do that again, but they could go out and get some some good arms here. So it'll be interesting to see what winds up happening with the New York Yankees here. Let's go across town and quickly touch on the New York Mets. They, as we said, got James McCann, got Trevor May. And I think the place to look now, and I don't know if you agree with me, Nick, here, is George Springer. This is the guy who's probably the best fit for the Mets out of the big names out there. They've been engaged with him. Sounds like it's probably going to come down to the Mets and the Blue Jays. But, Nick, I really feel like they can get George Springer to add to what they've gotten this offseason. You're looking at a much stronger team next year that can make some noise in the National League.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And you go through trying to match the free agent with the need in the organization that you're going to. And when we're just talking about the Yankees, it's about, okay, the need is the starting pitching, and how do they address that? Even maybe more than a DJ LeMahieu in that sense. In the same way for the Mets, LeMahieu would be a great addition to any team, but he's not really the need. And in the same way, we talked about Real Muto. They solved that with James McCann and even Trevor Bauer. Where is the need when you look at the free agent landscape? And that's in the outfield. So George Springer would be an excellent addition to them. They have to be the front runner to do that. And I think that you would look at a much better New York Mets team in a lineup that looks a lot deeper with Springer at the top of it. And you got to get guys to sort of come around. I'd love to see what we're gonna get out of Pete Alonso in year 3, after sort of a year that maybe didn't go as well as what was a spectacular rookie season for him. And he's a big piece for them in the middle of that lineup. So interested to see how things sort of shake out. James McCann as well is a guy who I'm interested to see how he fits in to the Mets lineup as well, in addition to handling things behind the plate. But George Springer has to be the guy that they're targeting. I'm with you there. If they feel like they can also potentially attract a Trevor Bauer, that's certainly something that at the right price you have to consider. But to me, I'm all in on the Mets with them, with Springer, and then to the bullpen. That's where my focus would be. And if you feel like Trevor May is a guy who plugs a hole on the back end, that's great. But I would not be done if I were the Mets and trying to spend on that bullpen.
No, certainly not. And I think for the rest of the offseason, right, you got your catcher, you got Trevor May. Sandy Alderson, who's the president of the Mets now, always jokes about shopping in the gourmet section versus the meat and potatoes. The bullpen is probably meat and potatoes right now because of how many games they blew last year. And so if you look at what they've done, and if you can add, George Springer, Liam Hendricks at the back end of that bullpen, possibly from the Oakland A's, and then maybe like a Jake Odorizzi, James Paxton type, in the middle towards the back end of that rotation, I think you'd be happy with that. I think that's a really good offseason. And Nick, I also think, because I've been ranting about a lot of stuff on this show, I also think it's very nice as a Mets fan to have actual baseball people in charge of the front office. Like, I know my standards are low, but last year at this time, the Mets had Jeff Wilpon and an agent making personnel decisions. And now they have Jared Porter, who's a really respected GM, I should say. They just hired Zach Scott from the Boston Red Sox as an assistant GM. You got to be happy with this if you're a Mets fan. And look, it's encouraging. I can't lie to you. I'm smiling from ear to ear right now for the people who are listening. And I think that's how a lot of Mets fans are this holiday season. They feel like Santa Claus, a.k.a. Steve Cohen, is really coming through.
Well, you feel a lot better about your baseball operation when it's not a bunch of interns who are running it, as opposed to people who you're actually paying full time. So that's the first thing that's good. But yeah, no, there's certainly so much more confidence in the Mets baseball operation right now. And you feel like it's the structure that Steve Cohen has put in place. That's the biggest thing. It's not just the money, because I'll go back to it. I've said it a million times on this program. But in 2019, 3 out of the top 5 teams in payroll didn't make the playoffs. So it's not about how much money you can spend. It's about how you use that money. And you feel confident, or more confident, certainly this year, that the Mets are making the right decisions from the top. So that, to me, is the biggest thing. You like to see what they're doing and how they will approach the rest of the offseason remains to be seen. But there's certainly, you feel like, headed in the right direction, which I know for Mets fans is something that is very encouraging because it is a drastic change from what they have seen the last any number of years.
Definitely good to be talking about that for months. Mets in the right direction. Don't remember the last time I said those two things in a sentence. Maybe the Jets can get that as well. Who knows? Don't want to be too greedy here. Nonetheless, coming up on 1:20 a.m. here in the East, taking you up until 2 a.m. on One. Andrew Posadas joins us next after he enjoyed the first half of Chelsea Arsenal. We're talking about some sports headlines of the year. I don't know what's coming exactly in this segment, but certainly looking forward to it. Stay with us here on One.
Be sure to check out all of our latest podcasts on WFUVsports.org or wherever you get your shows, including NFL Friday, Nosebleeds, Pick and Pod, 5 on 3, College Gridiron, and FUV FC. Also, our newest edition, Off the Air, diving into the station's legacy with its most prominent alumni. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Final hour here on One, New York's longest running sports call-in show. Andrew Posadas, Jimmy Sullivan, and Nick DeLuca here, leading you up to 2 a.m. And fellas, as you know, and as our viewers know, before we went into this virtual format, now we're on 90.7, but traditionally our rundown would include a 10:30-50 update. We have temporarily substituted that with a headline segment. And now that we've come to our final show of 2020, I figure why not have a 2020 sports year in review headline segment? Jimmy, Nick, if you would just give me a couple minutes, I'll break down everything that has happened. And from there, we can kind of expand and talk about the sports year that was. And let's start. January 13th, the Houston Astros punished for sign stealing, $5 million fine, 1-year suspensions for AJ Hinch and Jeff Luhnow. We saw Alex Cora and Carlos Beltran also suspended. One of the biggest things to start our year off, but maybe not the most biggest thing, because on January 22nd, Kobe Bryant, Gianna Bryant, 7 others die in a tragic helicopter crash a day after LeBron James passed Kobe Bryant on the all-time scoring list. Moving on to February 2nd, fellas, the Kansas City Chiefs, they ended their 50-year Super Bowl drought. They beat the San Francisco 49ers in Super Bowl 54, come back from a deficit to win 31-20. Let's move over to March 11th, one of the probably the most crucial day for all of us when we all stopped working. Rudy Gobert obviously testing positive for COVID-19, prompting the NBA to shut down, and then the other professional sports leagues in North America and around the country really following suit, following that positive case. And from there, we move on from the summer, fellas, where we saw a lot of social justice activism. It started on June 22nd, NASCAR drivers standing with Bubba Wallace after a noose was found in his garage leading up to that race at Talladega Speedway. Some other things that we saw, the WNBA dedicated their season on July 24th to the death of Breonna Taylor. The Milwaukee Bucks on August 26th, they sat out a playoff game in protest to the death of Jacob Blake. And on September 12th, Naomi Osaka wore the names of Black victims of police and vigilante violence on her masks on her way to winning the U.S. Open. And again, throughout the summer, we saw all the North American sports leagues come back: the NWSL, the MLS, the MLB, the NBA, and the WNBA in their respective bubbles. And moving into the fall, fellas, our champions of the year, we know the Tampa Bay Lightning were able to get the Stanley Cup, the Seattle Storm win the WNBA finals. And for the city of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Lakers back on top. They win the NBA finals in the bubble, get their first ring since they started off the decade in 2010 with a ring, with Kobe and them beating the Orlando Magic. And for the Los Angeles Dodgers, their first World Series win since 1988. They take home that World Series title. And I wanted to finish off with some historic feats from women in sports. Obviously, the Miami Marlins hiring Kim Ng, becoming the first female general manager in a North American sport on November 13th. On November 28th, fellas, Sarah Fuller became the first woman to play in a Power 5 football game for Vanderbilt. On December 12th, she would ultimately become the first woman to score in a Power 5 football game, going 2-2 in PATs. But fellas, I say all that to say it has been such an unprecedented, and I know that word gets thrown around all the time. It's really become cliche at this point, but very much so an unprecedented year for us here in the sports world. Jimmy, I'll start with you. When you hear me go off on all these headlines, what are some of the headlines that stick out the most to you?
My head's spinning. Like there was stuff in there that I had forgotten about, to be honest. I think I'll take the positive route here in that 2020 hasn't been all bad. Yeah, there's been history. There's been racial justice in sports. There's been incredible feats that you listed off. And look, 2020 has been, on the whole, not a good year for basically anyone. And I think sometimes, as bad as it's been, it's also important to remember some of the good stuff that happened in 2020, because there has been good stuff, especially in sports. The NBA and NHL and NWSL bubbles were a massive success in terms of keeping players safe and crowning champions. You listed off some of the other stuff. So I just think it's really important to note that as bad as this year has been, it's not necessarily all bad stuff. Like there was I was laughing because there was a couple of weeks ago I was watching Jeopardy, and there was a category, it was good stuff in 2020. And you have to remember from time to time that there has been, believe it or not, good stuff in 2020.
My head was spinning too. I was trying to keep track of everything that I had remembered, forgotten. Oh yeah, this team won that championship, and the list of events for sure. My biggest takeaway is the importance of sports in our society. I think is really the biggest thing, and how it can bring people together, and why we love doing what we do, right? And that to me is just the biggest takeaway. And whether that's being a catalyst for the important and necessary social change that we need in this country, or just as simple as giving people something to rally behind in a really difficult time, where 2020 has been really difficult for a lot of people for a long time, right? So it gives you an opportunity to sit back and watch LeBron James and the Lakers compete for a championship and ultimately win it, or the Major League Baseball postseason, and see the Dodgers finally break that drought and compete in a really great series against the Tampa Bay Rays. Or if you're a NHL fan, to see the Tampa Bay Lightning finally get over the hump, because it had been a while for them, a couple of really difficult playoff ousters recently. So to see them sort of come through and persevere was interesting as well. So it's always something that I come back to and maybe think about a little bit more now than I otherwise would have, in getting some more perspective about what sports means to us. And that to me is the biggest thing, because I think a lot of times people can say, well, what's the point? Or why are you spending your time on focusing on sports? Or why do you like them? Or whatever question that you want to pose or think of. But to me, that's the biggest thing, is how important they can be for us at times, especially difficult times, how they can bring us together even though we're apart, right? And that's the biggest thing for me in standing out, in addition to just sort of being a catalyst. It's really been as challenging a year as it's been. It's also been positive in a number of ways, and sports are at the forefront of that positivity for sure.
Yeah, that date, March 11th, when Rudy Gobert tested positive, at that time, a lot of us, we had heard about the coronavirus, but we didn't know it was going to come and impact us here. We had heard about it in China, but I think a lot of us, including myself, might have been a bit naive to think, well, that's over there. We should be fine here. And if it does come here, maybe a quick lockdown, people will follow protocol and we'll be out of this, by the summertime. But again, that wasn't the case. And I think none of us expected the shutdown that would subsequently follow. But as you mentioned, Nick, and Jimmy too touched on it, I think for sports, that's that camaraderie, especially for fans, because, we're rooting for players, for teams that we love, and we're invested. We kind of escape from reality in order to, to root for these teams and kind of immerse ourselves in the sports world, if you will. But I think this year, more than ever, kind of proved to us that, the sports world and the real world, they're right with each other every day, every single step. There's always social issues that are converging with the sports world. And I think when you think about things like drivers standing with Bubba Wallace after that news, that news, was just awful to know that, there's still people out there who feel and think a certain way and have, a racist mentality, for lack of a better word. But I think with a lot of these players and a lot of these teams taking their platform, Jimmy, and really using that to spread the message that, hey, sports is a place where everyone can come together and play on the same field, on the same court, on the same team, for the same, with players of different skin colors and nationalities. Sports is where everything converges and where people really can find that, that common ground, rooting for a team, rooting for players. So I think that was great. But, I harp back to, to January 26th, and when Kobe died, that was tough. We were Emmanuel Barbari, Sam Basil, who used to be here before he graduated in the summer. We were in St. Louis, and I remember Chris Hennessy was doing headlines that day on site in studio. And I think it was like 10 or 12 minutes before we were about to tip off. And Chris Hennessy just comes over and he says, hey, TMZ is saying that Kobe Bryant died. And I remember telling Emmanuel that day, like, I didn't really want to do the broadcast. And I felt like, here, seeing, experiencing that death, Jimmy, I just, I never thought in my wildest dreams going from that, to COVID, to the shutdown, that first half of the year was just so rough. But I really am grateful that once sports resumed again in the summer, that we just saw, players, teams really kind of take that extra step to really do more to bring all of us back together as fans.
Yeah, and you touched on Kobe Bryant, and it's funny because he had such an impact on sports, and you talk about the convergence of sports and culture and life, and his death, I think, hit people who were not necessarily sports fans, in the same way John Lennon's death did, or Princess Diana, or Michael Jackson, like whoever it may be. He had that kind of impact on the world, and it was so shocking as well. And you, Andrew, wrote a really good piece for the Ram about this, and I read other articles as well, that it felt like he was so invincible, right? That when he was on the basketball court, he could do whatever he wanted to do, and that's what it felt like in life too. Like, he was having a great post career. His daughter Gigi, who also died in the crash, was a great up and coming basketball player as well. And that's what made it so shocking and devastating, was that this was a guy who, I think it was Ramona Shelburne said this, bent the universe to his will, basically. And to have that happen, it still honestly doesn't feel real. Like, almost a year later, I'm sitting there like, there's no way. Like, there's just no way. But it unfortunately happened, and it's tragic and terrible. And it's still shocking to me, even though we're coming up on a year since it happened.
certainly shocking to think about. And it's one of those, do you remember where you were moments? I feel like, because Kobe was just such a larger than life figure in, as you guys mentioned, not just in the basketball world, but just in the world in general, right? And enjoying such a great post career, as you hit on, Jimmy, and just a guy that I think a lot of people drew toward, not just because of the play on the basketball court, but because of that perseverance, because of what everyone called the Mamba mentality, right? That ability to persevere and to work hard and to do things that was so applicable to whatever you were doing, whether that be playing basketball or just doing your job on a daily basis, or playing whatever sport that you want. I think that he just was such an impactful figure in our culture, and that's what just made it so devastating. And then to see the rest of it, and the six other members as well, and his daughter, and just the whole situation, it was such a rough way to start the year, as I think you guys really mentioned pretty well. And it's been good to at least get the sports back and to return to a greater level of being normal, and trying to, regain this sort of life that we once all lived. But that was certainly a tough way to start it, and something that I don't think anyone will be forgetting anytime soon.
Yeah, Nick, and even with, obviously the passing of Kobe Bryant and the pandemic, shutting everything down, aside that, we've seen some historic feats from champions. I mentioned the Kansas City Chiefs. They ended a 50-year, drought by winning the Super Bowl. The Dodgers won their first, World Series since 1988. LeBron added a fourth ring, to his resume and trying to chase Michael Jordan as the greatest of all time. So even with, these catastrophes that have happened throughout the year, we've seen a lot of achievement from teams. And I think the sports world was able to come to that. And I think when we look back on this year of 2020, we'll be able to look back at the Chiefs and the Dodgers, teams like the Lakers, the Storm, and Tampa Bay. They'll forever be etched in history, winning championships to start this decade.
I'll also bring up this point. When we were in the doldrums of like April and May, if I would have told you that every sport would crown a champion, either by the end of this year or early in 2021, I don't know what you would have told me, because we were sitting there and it was not looking good, to be very honest. And the fact that they were able to, the sports deserve a lot of credit. I think, the basketball and hockey in particular, I think deserve a ton of credit for the bubbles and the hub cities and keeping their players safe that way. But just the fact that all this stuff actually happened, I think is also really noteworthy, because, there were plenty of times where we were sitting there saying, I don't know if this is going to work. And yet here we are with, schedules thrown off. Yes. And seasons shortened, of course, but still having, the team that wins the last game of the season hoisting the trophy. So I think that's really notable as well.
I agree 100%, right? You're trying to figure out how the heck all this stuff is going to happen in April and May, and like, hey, are we going to be able to go outside anytime soon, or what is that going to look like, as opposed to even, are we going to crown a champion everywhere? So it's really impressive what a number of leagues have been able to do. And I'll throw some credit Major League Baseball's way too, because the bubble, as logistically difficult as that is, once you're able to get agreement and sort of get everyone in there, as long as you're strict in following the protocols, that kind of takes care of itself. It's much more difficult to try and operate and navigate the way Major League Baseball did, and the NFL has done so far really pretty well this year. So a lot of credit goes to them as well, because they're trying to figure all this stuff out. Of course, when you're not in a bubble, it's never going to be perfect. And you're never going to sit there and say, Major League Baseball got an A+ with this. I thought the Justin Turner situation is something you can't ignore at the end of the whole World Series. And that was something that I thought kind of was really unfortunate, because it put a damper on how well things had gone up to that point, and really put a damper on the Dodgers celebration too. It was one of those things where it's like, dude, just stay in the clubhouse or wherever you're going. It's tough, but you got to make sure that you're doing things the right way. So that was the one hiccup, but a lot of credit goes to them too, I think is something that can't be ignored, because I don't want to say the bubble's easy, because it's not. But at the same time, once you get everything set up, you're in pretty good shape. It's navigating the players and everything that happens in daily life and testing and all this stuff that has been, to me, really sort of impressive in that sense too.
Yeah, back in the spring, I definitely was on the side of, hey, we're not playing sports until everything is back to normal. But, fast forward now to, the end of the year, I'm grateful. I'm happy that, these professional sports leagues were able to figure it out and provide some semblance of normalcy for us. And I want to give us here at WFUV Sports a special shout out, because for a few months, we were having one-on-ones with no content whatsoever. We were, tracking the pandemic, what was happening, how sports were reacting, but we really didn't have anything to kind of bounce off of like we do now. So I would say for us here at WFUV Sports, I think we did a hell of a job giving our viewers about as much content as we could. And now fast forward to the end of the year, just grateful that we have sports, and hopefully going into 2021, we get back, it probably won't be 100% normalcy, but get closer and closer till, fans can come back and root for their teams. Someplace like Toronto, they can have Jurassic Park there and people can stand next to each other and root for their team. Hopefully we can get back to that, Jimmy. But again, such a tumultuous year, something that we've never experienced and may never experience again.
Yeah, definitely a tough one. And I could definitely attest being part of those first few weeks back. And shout out our producer, Alex Wolves, who is kind of the reason why we're here at this point. He came up with the infrastructure for this operation, and it helped us a lot. But I remember those first few weeks, we were trying to figure it out. It's like, what are we going to talk about? I don't know, because there's no games. But eventually we did figure it out, and that's testament to you guys and everyone here at WFUV, Bobby, Emmanuel, Jackson, everyone doing a great job on that front. All right, 20 minutes to go in our show, and coming up next, I'm sure everyone out there has New Year's resolutions. Whether or not they work, obviously a very different story. But we're going to come back. We're going to make some sports New Year's resolutions, because I know you probably have those too. Jimmy, Nick, and Andrew with you. 20 more minutes on 90.7 FM, Facebook, and YouTube. We'll be right back on One on One.
To support the WFUV Sports Department, visit support.wfuv.org to become a member or make a one-time donation. WFUV Sports, home to New York's longest-running sports call-in show and the flagship station of Fordham Athletics.
Alongside Nick DeLuca and Andrew Posadas, I am Jimmy Sullivan. So glad you're with us on this early Sunday morning. Guys, it's that time of the year. Just a handful of days left in 2020. Start making New Year's resolutions. You start thinking about what you can do better in 2021, how you can improve yourself. And crazy as it sounds, I think this could apply to sports as well, your fandom, how you view your teams, so on and so forth. So I'll ask you guys, and I'll start with you, Nick. What is a New Year's resolution that you've made as a sports fan for 2021?
I'm going to enjoy this upcoming Buffalo Bills playoff run for what it is and take a step back as best I can to just revel and enjoy being in the position that we are in because it has been a very long time. Now, I am very much hung up on the fact that the Bills have not won a playoff game in my lifetime. So hopefully we will get that done at some point this year. But to me, the biggest thing is that now it's 3 out of the last 4 years, and you kind of grow accustomed to it. And okay, this is what we expect and what the Bills organization has done. But for the first 17 years of my life, we had nothing. And I'm very aware of how it feels to perennially be on the outside looking in of the playoffs, of having a team that is not competitive, and most importantly, not having a quarterback who is good enough to put you in the upper echelon of the league. That has certainly changed as of recently. So I am going to enjoy the Bills being in the playoffs. I'm going to take a step back to appreciate what that means, and also appreciate that they seem to have found a bona fide franchise quarterback and something that you can't take for granted. I'm always and have always been so tired of the way Patriots fans would take Tom Brady for granted, how Packers fans would take Aaron Rodgers for granted. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to enjoy and appreciate what Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills have accomplished this year and enjoy the playoff run. That's my 2020 fandom New Year's resolution.
Yeah, Jimmy, for me, it kind of plays off Nick. My resolution is stop being such a prisoner in the moment when it comes to sports. I think in our business and what we do here in sports media, that's kind of that kind of entails what you should do every single day. We're always prisoners of the moment. You know, earlier we spoke about the Nets after 2 games. Can they win the championship? I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I've seen Jalen Hurts for 15 minutes, and I think he's eons better than Carson Wentz, and I'm ready to trade him to Chicago for whatever they want. But again, at the end of the day, we can't be so quick to react to news like that. You always, as Nick said, you got to kind of take a step back, keep things in perspective, and look at the bigger picture. And that, you know, just because a team is playing well or just because a team is playing badly, that doesn't necessarily entail where they will ultimately end up, whether they'll be a great team or whether they'll be an awful team. So for me, Jimmy, it's not being a prisoner in the moment, understanding that for sports, it goes day in, day out, week in, week out. And it really is a process. And just because your team has a slow start doesn't necessarily mean that they won't end on a high note, and vice versa. So for me, Jimmy, it's not being a prisoner in the moment, although I find myself wanting to be a prisoner in the moment every single day we talk about sports.
Certainly a valid resolution. So I think mine goes back very well to what we were talking about in the last segment. I will never take Titans Jaguars on Thursday Night Football for granted ever again. And, you know, we talk in sports sometimes. We look at certain games, certain things. You're like, oh, that's not a good matchup. And look, there were 5 NBA games yesterday. Not taking that for granted. None of them were particularly close. But guess what? I watched them and I enjoyed them. Even though, yeah, will there be better games this season? Yeah, absolutely. But just to have it back, I think you have to sit there and say, you know what? Maybe I'm not going to be so cynical about this game or this matchup or how I think it's going to go. And maybe it's just more appropriate to sit back and say, hey, sports is great. Like, let's just kick back and enjoy it. And look, we examine sports and we look at this stuff with a critical eye, and we'll continue doing that, obviously. But I just want to enjoy it a little more. And we've got it back. Hopefully we can keep it. And it's just, I'm trying to just have fun, as generalized as that may sound. I think that's kind of how we have to look at it right now in 2020, as we go into 2021, I should say.
I'm with you there. No, I agree with you. I'm trying to think of more sort of New Year's resolutions here as you're talking, and I'm going through of things that I want to pay attention to and not taking things for granted. And that is, I think, a familiar theme from what we have seen through just 2020 in general, right? Not taking things for granted and making sure that you appreciate the things, the little things, whatever those might be, and that's something that I've certainly paid attention to as it relates to sports. I also feel like as sort of a secondary New Year's resolution, I need to stop paying attention to the just overall abyss of dumb opinions that exist on Twitter. So that's where I am sort of at number 2. Because the next time I hear something about whether it be the Nets are going to win the NBA title after 2 games because they look good, or that the Bills stink and should play their third string quarterback because Josh Allen didn't play well against Kansas City the one time earlier this season, or LeBron should be on the bench because he airballed a free throw, or you know that those people are out there somewhere, or MJ would never have airballed that free throw. So, this is what we're talking about. So that's the other thing that I feel like I really need to focus on, because I could go at it all day with people on Twitter and just looking at stuff and saying, that might be the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Oh, wait, I scrolled down another comment, right? So you're just sitting there and it wraps and continues, and it's an endless cycle. So that's the other thing for me, where you're just, whether it be about the Bills, which people know they can sort of, it's a hot button issue. They can really get me going on that. But just in general, whatever it might be, if it's the NBA, NFL, college football, whatever it is, just some of the stuff that is said sometimes, I got to block it out and just be like, all right, that person doesn't know what he or she is talking about. And I don't need to necessarily correct them or say anything. I can just sort of laugh to myself and say, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I think that might be a productive way to approach 2021.
Yeah, Jimmy, I'd also say we talk about taking things for granted. I would say a secondary resolution for myself is, when it is made available, attend more live games. I feel like, obviously here at WFUV, we have the privilege of covering the New York professional sports teams as reporters. But again, I think back to March and thinking to myself, after covering, I think the last game I covered was the Nets and the Spurs, after Kenny Atkinson had gotten fired for some odd reason. I don't know why to this day. But again, Kyrie Irving. Anyways, having said all that, I think, just going to games as a fan, I think not only reporting it, but just, I really felt like I took that for granted back in March, thinking, I'll cover a bunch more games this summer. I'll catch a couple games with my dad, with my brother, and not having that opportunity. I think not only for the purposes of covering it and being a reporter, but just attending live games and just enjoying it, putting your phone down and enjoying the action right in front of you, and just being one of the fans again, because as reporters, we have to be unbiased and we got to call it down the line, but just being a fan, being around other fans, and just enjoying that game atmosphere again.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Nick, I love what you said about people on Twitter.
Yes.
There are so many bad takes on Twitter. Like, it's full of them. I saw a really good tweet yesterday, actually. Somebody had said that so many people on Twitter made their headway by being LeBron James extremists on one side or the other. Like, on the one hand, oh, he stinks, he's terrible, whatever. And on the other hand, like, this guy's the greatest thing ever. And look, I love LeBron, don't get me wrong, but those people are out there. And I think also you have to sit there and say, I'm not going to engage with that, because a lot of these people on the internet, they say stuff like that. They just want you to engage. Like, they'll get ratioed. They don't care. Like, that's the whole name of the game. Because they know that you'll bite. It's like, a fish at the end of a line. So I think that's also really important. I'll say another resolution for me, and I'll probably end up breaking this one eventually. In 2021, I will not root for any of my teams to lose. And that's how I've ended 2020, with watching the Jets and rooting for everyone they play. And And I hope I don't have to do that in 2021. If I do, I do. But I'm also going to make that a resolution because there's really nothing worse than starting a season with whatever hope there is. In the Jets' case, probably not a ton. And you think, okay, win a few games, whatever. And then by week 6, you're pining for Trevor Lawrence. You might not even get. But you're sitting there saying that the best path forward for this team that you root for, you care about, and you love is for them to lose the rest of their games. And it's what we've needed to do in 2020 as Jets fans is root for them to lose. But I hate doing it. And look, it would have been the best way forward for them to get the number 1 pick. I don't think that's going to wind up happening, but it really stunk to watch those games. To be excited about a Las Vegas Raiders Hail Mary when they're down 4 to win the game against your own team. That's an experience that, while it had fleeting moments of fun, it's also something that I never want to do again. If I have to, okay, but I never, ever want to root for any of my teams to lose ever again. It's just not fun for me anymore.
So in keeping with the Jets, and this is going to be my final one that I know I will break at some point, is to take the high road, okay? And that involves being a little bit nicer to Jets fans. Now, that will ignore the group chat that I was entered into at halftime of week 1 in 2019 about how great Sam Darnold was and how bad Josh Allen was. I'll just throw out a few names who might or might not have been involved in that group chat. That would be Emmanuel Berbari, Jackson Heil, and Dominic Capone, right? I will ignore the noise of how great the Jets were at times, or how warranted Joe Namath is to be a Hall of Famer. I will refrain from sending jersey swaps of Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville gear. I will no longer send edits of Justin Fields in a Jets uniform. And I will not send the picture around, or will not continue the circulation of the guy who got a Trevor Lawrence Jets jersey already, with his hands on his head as he watches the Jets take a knee on the first overall pick. So I'm not going to do any of that. I'm just going to enjoy my successes and not necessarily pay attention to the failures of others. But that's going to be one of my sort of taking the high road New Year's resolution. I don't need to kick the Jets while they're down. Adam Gase already took care of that for me. So I don't really need to engage in any of that stuff. So I'm going to take the high road and be a little bit nicer to Jets fans in particular. I think is really where the high road New Year's resolution is going to center around. So Jimmy, if I have offended you, I know I made a couple of remarks, even in college football gridiron, about Trevor Lawrence and him not being a Jet. And while I won't say he's going to be a Jet, I am sorry for the pain that has caused you. That is my New Year's resolution number 3. I'm going to take the high road on the Jets.
Jimmy, do you want to respond to that?
Not really, no. I think, Nick, this is, I mean, how long are we giving this? 4 days? Like, the Jets play their last game on January 3rd against the Patriots. They'll probably win, if we're being honest. And I mean, as soon as that game ends, you're going to send me the Trevor Lawrence Jaguars Photoshop, aren't you?
Well, he might be wearing the black uniform instead of the teal. I mean, I might switch it up a little bit, right? Maybe the white jersey?
Whatever. We could trade. I mean, the Jets could trade up to 1, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure Jacksonville's all ears on the pick, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Actually, the league could take it away. Okay, now I don't know what stage of grief I'm in, but
maybe if the Jets sell the team and then rejoin as an expansion franchise, hey.
Well, just remember with the Jets, Woody Johnson is back on January 21st, so that'll be entertaining. Anyway, Jimmy, Andrew, I'm sorry.
If I had just one more resolution for all sports fans, and this includes me because I fall guilty. I'm guilty of this too. take some time to watch the game and not just immerse yourself on Twitter on the timeline waiting and just refreshing to see the next joke or the next meme or the next funny commentary about the game you're watching. Don't worry about that. Just take some time, watch the game, and then catch up on that later. I think too many times we're looking to be there immediately and then even drop one of our jokes off and hoping that we get 15 minutes of fame on sports Twitter. So for everyone out there, watch the game. Twitter's not going anywhere. You can always refresh afterwards and take a look at the commentary. You don't need to do it then immediately in the moment.
No more Jets jokes, at least until January 2nd.
Until January 2nd, that's
all right. We got a good day in there. I will say to your point, Andrew, before we wrap up, that's unrealistic for me. So I'll just say, to save myself some time, have the memes ready beforehand. That's all I've got, guys. This was fun. Awesome to be with you guys, and happy end of 2020. Seriously, this has been not a great year, and I'm kind of happy to have it done. Sports director of WFUV is Bobby Shafardini. Our special thanks to our guest today, Jake Kring-Schreifels, member of the WFUV class of 2014, for spending some time with us as part of Off the Air, the podcast. As always, our producer is Alex Wolves. For my partner, Nick DeLuca, and Andrew Posadas on the headlines, I am Jimmy Sullivan. Happy holidays, happy new year from all of us at WFUV Sports.